Today, we're going to cover some of the cave diving disasters that we have covered on this channel. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. In 1995, 5 members of the Rensselaer Outing Club traveled to the wilderness in New York State to venture into a mysterious cave that spelunkers couldn't fully explore for over 100 years after its discovery. As they advanced, they found a tight labyrinth of stone that was nearly totally submerged in chilling water. With only a few inches of air to breathe, one caver made a disastrous mistake. A heroic, life-saving battle ensued, and the woman who famously walked with a broken leg to aid in her own rescue climbed down into the abyss once more to help these trapped cavers just 4 years after her own harrowing incident. Would she get there in time to save them? Keep listening to find out how this wild tale unfolds. Before we dive into the video, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to this channel. Our subscriber rate has grown from 8% to 13%, which is truly amazing. If you're new here, simply click the subscribe button, like this video, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Now let's get into the video. Clouded sky shrouded the midday sun as wind groaned through the barren trees just outside the town of Skohari. Earlier on that October morning, light snow dusted the forest. But by the time the cavers reached the edge of the wilderness, the only evidence of precipitation was a partially soaked floor of leaves that squished beneath their boots as they hiked to a cave in the James Gage Karst Preserve. This caving trip was planned by a club at America's oldest technological research university, the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. They brought full-body wetsuits to provide an insulating layer in the cold waters of the cave, and they also brought packs with food, water, and 2 backup lights in addition to their main headlamps or handheld lights. The party were no strangers to the outdoors, and even though it was under 50 degrees outside that day, and likely even colder in the shaded tunnels below ground, they felt ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The members of the group were Eric Kirkner, Sarah Cutler, Thomas Howe, Joe Bailly, and Scott Stepanuk. Scott was likely the leader of the group, having been a lifelong member of the National Speleological Society. Scott was also a canoe racer, which was a skill that could be useful in Ball's Cave, otherwise known as Gage Cave. The cavern is named for its old owner, Simeon Ball, who discovered it in 1831, although some accounts call it Gage after the preserve it's found on today. After a short hike, the group came to a hill in the woods with a rocky outcropping and a crack that slid into the darkness. By the time they reached the cave, it was 6 p.m. and the temperature was dropping. Over the next few hours, the air above ground would plummet to barely above freezing. But they weren't going to let that stop them from exploring the lost passage of Gage Cave. The entrance to Gage Cave is a 75-foot straight drop that free hangs above the darkness. The group looped their ropes around nearby trees and anchored them to the ground and began their descent down the wet, mud-covered walls of the cave. Gage Cave now has a rugged ladder that descends to a small divot in the wall where cavers have to transition to a second huge ladder bolted to large wooden reinforcement beams at varying heights, though cavers are expected to tie off at the surface for safety. Near the bottom of the vertical shaft, a small rocky ledge stuck out at around the same area as the hole. Then, after touching boot to stone, the passage took a steep decline for another 30 feet before reaching a second, shorter vertical drop. After completing the second climb in the chilly air of the cave, the group splashed into a slow stream that coursed throughout the whole cave. Their wetsuits protected them at this early stage when the stream started around 4 feet wide and 2 feet deep. But after a decent walk, the stream sinks into 30-foot wide subterranean lakes. Ball's Cave contains at least 14 different underground lakes, and the main water passage extends around 2 miles, with a max depth of around 200 feet below ground. Past cave trips used a small boat to traverse the stream, and this group could have used one of the boats, or they may have brought their own canoe. They may have even swam through the lakes in their wetsuits. But there are no accounts of how they completed this first section of the cave. As they progressed through the winding chambers, they marveled at the limestone walls, uniformly covered in small lines that mark layers of bone and sediment that built up gradually over millennia to form the magnificent structure they were exploring. The air was icy as they crossed the large lakes beyond the entrance. After a long journey, they reached a walking section that went to a room called the amphitheater, which had 100-foot-tall walls and massive speleothems. Advancing further, they used ropes to descend a hole at the end of the next passage. There, the outing club found themselves in the square room, where water trickled down the rocks, forming little steps. Following the slope down brought them to a corner with a small pool and a tiny, almost invisible arch that hung just above the spot where the walls meet with the cloudy water. This spot was the end of the cave for about 100 years. No caver dared explore the tiny river passage until scuba and cave technology advanced enough to protect them as they explored the passage. They weren't the first to go through the Lost Passage in Ball's Cave, but they were among a small group of trailblazers who braved the claustrophobic tunnel. This passage is known as the low airspace section, since that minuscule triangular dome of rock is the only space cavers have for air as they crawl along with frigid water up to their ears throughout the whole passage. The cavers had to practically lay on their backs, moving feet first, almost totally parallel with the floor, with just their necks bent upright to stay out of the water. One by one, they filed into the narrow tube. They were all able to fit, and at the beginning, they could all keep their faces above water. But as they progressed, they ran into an unexpected problem. Each movement created waves, which would be barely noticeable for small groups, but with this fairly large group, each wave crashed into one another, creating higher waves that reached the ceiling, splashing into the cavers, covering their faces, and making it even harder to breathe. The constructive interference of the waves wasn't the only problem they had to face. More people breathing produces more carbon dioxide, which could quickly suck all the oxygenated air out of the room and suffocate them if they moved too slowly or if they got stuck. The splashing waters slowed the lead caver's pace, which caused all the others to bunch up behind them, making the waves even worse and causing everyone to wait in practically ice-cold waters. Their wetsuits weren't designed to block waters this cold for this long. They weren't even out of the passage when they felt the cold begin to sap the life from their limbs. Thankfully, they were able to traverse this section without any major incidents, and after 2 hours below ground, they reached the battle room. They were all varying levels of cold as they exited the low air section, some worse than others. Beyond the low air section, the cave expanded into walkable sections, with long, spiky rock jutting out along the lengths of the chamber to signify old water height marks. Advancing even deeper into the cave, the water got deeper again, but the walls widened, becoming something like a sewage drain that they had to wade through. The bitter waters once again stole more heat from their bodies as they advanced. Further down, some of the rooms were stripped bare of the delicate limestone formations that made them so unique, as landowners broke them down and sold them to collectors and museums. After lamenting the destruction of the cave and completing their goals, the Rensselaer Outing Club turned around to leave Gage Cave behind. Now, to avoid another battle to breathe in the low air section, they decided to enter the waterlogged passage one person at a time to avoid sitting around in the frigid water and to avoid creating too many waves. The waters were high, but not unbearable for the first length of the return trip, but partway down, it would turn into the low air passage. Since the cavers would lose sight of each other along the winding length of the tunnel, they planned to signal with a yell when each member reached the low airspace portion to give each person just enough space to get through without wasting too much time. They picked Sarah to go first because she was the coldest. If she didn't go through it first, she might not be strong enough to complete the exit climbs after waiting around for the others to get ahead. Sarah hesitated as she braced herself for the shocking cold of the water. After a moment, she waded into the long tunnel and disappeared into the distance. After a few minutes, she reached the low air section and yelled to the group. As she sat down to complete the tunnel, she realized the water level had risen, making the passage even more cramped. It was hard to see since she was basically facing the ceiling the entire time, and she wasn't familiar with this cave and its routes. Still, she began her crawl through the tunnel. That was Scott's cue to begin his crossing. Pushing through the water, Scott felt tension well up inside him as he approached the low air space. He dreaded seeing Sarah stuck in the water. Or worse. She wasn't stuck on this side of the passage, which was a good sign. However, when Scott emerged from the square room, Sarah wasn't there. Meanwhile, back at the group, they heard the distant echo of Scott's yell. It was faint, but Joe took it as his cue, prepped his mind and body, and he descended into the water for his turn to cross. Following a chain of signals, Thomas and Eric also took their turns. However, when the last in line, Eric Kirkner, reached the low air section, he found Thomas still waiting on this side. Thomas relayed the game of telephone to Eric, telling him that Sarah was missing, and Scott went further into the square room to look for her. Scott's yell wasn't the signal to send Joe. He was trying to warn them that Sarah had vanished. Thomas and Eric went back to the low air passage to look for any sign of her. Sarah didn't realize it, but she had had two options for exiting the low air section. She could turn down an S-shaped tunnel or go straight. The straight route didn't lead to the exit, and it was blocked by a sump, a place where the low air section of the cave had become a no air section as the ceiling fell below the water level, creating a totally submerged passage. Eric and Thomas both followed the straight passage, not realizing it was submerged, and when they got to the sump, their hearts sank. They quickly turned back to the square room. Earlier, Sarah had assumed that the higher waters had flooded the exit, so she free-dove the first sump, holding her breath and opening her eyes in the murky waters of the cave until she got to a small pocket of air. But on the other side, the cave sumped again. She was already the coldest of the group, and finally submerging herself made her temperature drop even more. She took a few short gasps of air and dove under the second sump. This time, she emerged into a room. She thought she had made it back, but as she climbed out of the water, she realized it wasn't the square room. Sarah yelled in the cold, dark chamber, but got no response. As fear and cold started to twist her mind and body, she went back into the water and tried to dive under the sumps to find her way back, but the waters were too cold. Her body was too stiff, and her muscles were shivering and unable to perform the deft maneuvers she needed to survive the flooded sections. She managed to reverse in the tube of rock and return to the unknown room where she would wait, freezing and alone. Around this time, Scott was ending his search and returning to the square room. As he double-checked for any holes or any signs of her, walking away, he heard a cry from Sarah, who attempted contact once more after returning to her trapped room. Scott followed her voice and found that she was in a room below the group, but the passage was blocked by heavy boulders that had broken down from the ceiling ages ago. Eric and Thomas got back to the square room to meet the others, and Scott informed them what had happened. Thomas knew that the route had sumped, but since Sarah got through it and he was comparatively warmer, he volunteered to follow Sarah's route, thinking that together they could find a way to safety. He went back down the S-tunnel, reached the first sump, held his breath, and dove beneath the waters. The first sump was unexpectedly long. He couldn't find the air, so he swam faster, his heart racing as he fought the urge to breathe in the cold, dark waters of James Gage Cave. As his cheeks swelled, trying to hold back a breath, he reached the air pocket. After coughing and gasping in the small pocket of air, Thomas collected himself and dove the second sump. As he surfaced, he found Sarah on a ledge above the water, eating some food to regain some of her strength. Thomas reached her, and the pair discussed the situation. He immediately realized it was too dangerous to go back. They were both stuck in this side room, cold and isolated. After a back-and-forth shouting match through the rubble, Thomas informed the others that they were trapped. Eric, Joe, and Scott debated their options. They didn't want to immediately call for help. Instead, they brainstormed ways to help. They could either dig through the rubble or get scuba gear to help them through the sumps. However, going back for scuba gear would take far too long, and there was no way they could dig through the rubble on their own. After weighing their options, they realized that they had to get help to save Sarah and Thomas. Eric decided to stay in the cave to lend any support he could to the stranded cavers, while Scott and Joe would exit Ball's cave to get help. Joe and Scott flew through the rest of the cave and exited a little over an hour after they left the room. Once above ground, they walked to the nearest house where they could call for help. A house owned by Emily Mobley. The same Emily who, just 4 years prior, aided in her own rescue during a 4-day-long operation after a boulder broke her lower leg in the 1,604-foot-deep, 54-mile-long Lechuguilla Cave. After spending a long time trying to figure out Sarah's location and planning what to do, the sun had set, and it was getting late. Scott and Joe knocked on her door, but there was no answer. Meanwhile, back in the cave, Eric rummaged through his pack to find any pieces of metal he could use to hit the rocks and begin digging through the breakdown as fast as he could, splitting the rock and shoveling dirt and gravel out of the way. Through sheer force of will, Eric created a 15-inch triangular hole in breakdown. He made contact with Sarah and Thomas, and they tried to squeeze through the hole, but even Sarah, the lighter of the two, was unable to fit through the hole. Scott and Joe went further into the town and called the sheriff's office. Then they went back to Emily's and continued to try to wake her. By the time an ambulance arrived, Emily had finally woken up to help with the rescue. She suited up and brought a pack with extra clothes, heat packs, and food. While emergency personnel were waiting for cave rescuers, Emily climbed down the ladder and into the cave alone. Living just a stone's throw away from the cave gave Emily an advantage. She knew the Gage cave like the back of her hand, so she quickly got to the square room to aid Sarah and Thomas. Using the hole Eric had dug, she delivered the care packages, and without wasting any time, she knelt down and helped Eric dig in the square room. After the minutes rolled by, Emily got concerned. She only led the charge back into Ball's cave because she thought Scott and Joe were coming back to help dig. But as time dragged on, there was no sight of the others. It turned out, the rescue crew and the others had thought Emily was going to come back to the surface after analyzing the situation. Then she could tell the teams exactly what kind of tools they needed to bring to help blast through the rubble. This whole situation emphasizes the importance of communication and the role of the controller or warden during cave rescues. Had a controller taken command of the situation immediately, they could have all been on the same page, which would have made the operation faster and far less worrisome for everyone involved. It's problems like these that turn rescues into body recoveries. Caving guidelines were still progressing back in the 90s, so rapid assessment of controllers wasn't guaranteed. And there were other assumptions that made the above-ground crew jump to conclusions. Past standards preferred written communication to pass accurate information between different parties. Today, with field phones, people can verbally communicate, allowing the receiver to write down and consolidate any necessary information, which can then be passed on through a chain of command instead. If they had planned to use phones, a second crew would have entered the cave even if Emily wasn't returning to the surface. But instead, the above-ground team was stalled. Emily and Eric dug through the dirt and grime and hammered the boulders with all their might, but they were struggling. Emily was still tired from only a few hours of sleep, and Eric was cold and exhausted. After a few hours, the pair managed to crack one of the larger pieces of stone, sending its rubble crashing to the floor below, and its crumbling sent another stone crashing to the floor with an echoing thump. With the hole expanded, Sarah and Thomas felt that they could get through, but it was just a little too high for them to reach now that the structure of the rock had changed. Working together without safety harnesses to keep them tethered to the floor above, Emily and Eric reached down into the tunnel, grasped Sarah's hands, and pulled her to the ledge of the hole. Sarah gripped the rock and pushed with all of her might as the pair helped her to safety on the floor of the square room above. After taking a moment to breathe, they repeated the process with Thomas and got them both up to relative safety. But they still had to exit the remaining distance of James Gage Cave, and they were worried about the above-ground crew. They still had no idea where they were. A cave-in or flood could be blocking the exit. But there was only one way to find out. They moved slowly as their stiff bones ached in the icy waters. After what felt like an endless hike, the group saw lights approaching. They gave some banter, assuming it was the rest of the Rensselaer Club, but the approaching lights weren't from Joe and Scott. The rescue team had finally reached the cave and gone inside. The approaching rescuers paused the group to give a medical assessment. They were in bad shape, but since they had made it this far, Eric, Thomas, and Sarah were cleared to exit on their own accord. They continued to move toward the surface together. Sarah and Thomas were both very weak, so the rescue team helped them up some of the final climbs using ropes and harnesses to keep them safe. After hours of struggle, all members of the team made it out of Ball's Cave alive. Thomas and Sarah rode in the ambulance to stay in a nearby hospital where they were treated for hypothermia. Eric may have joined them, since even though he didn't go through the sumps, he had stayed in near freezing temperatures with the trapped cavers. Some of the members of that group may have hung up their headlamps and boots for good, but others kept on caving. Scott became a scholarship judge for the National Cave Rescue Commission and an instructor in the Northeast Mobile Search and Rescue Team, where he learned from past events like this one to help other cavers who found themselves in dire situations. Now, even with rising oceans, Gage Cave hasn't flooded yet. Would you dare to travel through the low air passage? Let us know in the comments section. Click the like button if you enjoyed this crazy true story of some of caving's most legendary figures. Join us on an epic adventure into the depths of underwater caves, explore mysterious passages, encounter fascinating creatures, and witness the thrill of deep diving like never before. Have you ever heard of the Zacaton sinkhole, the deepest sinkhole in the world? In 1994, cave diving legend Sheck Exley set his sights on conquering the Zacaton, the deepest sinkhole on Earth in Mexico. But his courageous dive for discovery turned into a nightmare. Sheck never resurfaced. His dive buddy surfaced alone, shaken with clues that something went terribly wrong down there. But Sheck's fate remains a chilling puzzle. Was it a mechanical failure? A dangerous mystery hides in the deep, dark water. Let's explore the final dive of Sheck Exley. We'll uncover the challenges of extreme cave diving, the risks that hidden beneath the surface, and the enduring mystery surrounding a legend's final journey. Zacaton is a super deep underwater hole in Mexico. This system has unique rock formations and is near the Sierra de Tamaulipas in Mexico. The hole is filled with warm water and is called a sinkhole. It goes down really, really deep, 339 meters. That makes it one of the deepest water-filled holes in the whole wide world. People love to explore these special places, but they need to be careful because they can be tricky and a bit dangerous. So, Zacaton is like a super deep, warm water hole in a cool part of Mexico where adventurers like to go and see amazing things underwater. On April 6th, 1994, Sheck Exley set out for an exciting mission called the El Protector de Buceo Profundo project at the Zacaton sinkhole in Mexico. Sheck wasn't alone. He had his diving buddy, Jim Bowden, right there with him. Sheck Exley was a dive superhero. He planned dives like a champ and was the first to go scuba diving really deep, beyond 800 feet. Imagine a 240 meter underwater. What's more, he did over 4,000 dives without getting decompression sickness. Sheck's experience and expertise made him a respected figure in the diving community. Sheck and his dive buddy Jim were ready to explore the sinkhole. They set up a special underwater rope to guide them down and swam through a long tunnel. After a final check to make sure everything was working, they gave each other a signal and began their dive. Jim dived for a few seconds before Sheck joined him. They were about 8 to 9 meters separated from each other, but they were connected with the guidelines. It was important to be more careful because one wrong move underwater could be very dangerous. As Sheck and Jim went deeper, they checked in with each other. Jim then dove deeper, holding his breath for a short moment before continuing their descent. Cave diving requires special breathing. Divers take slow, deep breaths to avoid using too much air or building up carbon dioxide. Divers like Sheck and Jim have to breathe very carefully underwater. They take slow, deep breaths to last longer and avoid getting sick. If they breathe too fast, it messes up their plan, which was to spend 10-12 minutes going down. Jim and Sheck brought air tanks with them as they dove down to 290 feet. At that depth, Sheck attached his tank to a line, while Jim used a smaller tank. Later, they switched to a special gas mix called Trimix for safety as they went deeper. As Jim dove deeper, he spotted Sheck's light ahead but noticed Sheck was descending faster than usual. Around 700 feet, Sheck's body started acting strange. His vision blurred and he felt itching all over. This was due to high-pressure nervous syndrome caused by rapid descent. Sheck had to decide whether to stop or keep going. He decided to continue his descent, but at a slower rate. At around 860 feet, Sheck's body started shaking, but he pushed through. Despite his blurred vision from the pressure, he saw a lunar-like landscape covered in rocks and sediment. Realizing he couldn't stay long, he started ascending, and halfway up, the symptoms eased. Meanwhile, Jim reached 900 feet and was surprised to find he used more air than expected. Jim faced a serious problem when his main air tank failed at 920 feet, so he switched to his backup tank at 450 feet. But when he tried to use it, the regulator broke, causing panic. He had to manually control his breathing. Luckily, he found staged air at 350 feet and continued his ascent back to the surface. Jim, noticing Sheck's unused equipment, realized something was wrong. Jim felt worried when he realized Sheck hadn't surfaced yet. He wondered why Sheck would dive so deep. Meanwhile, their support diver on the surface, Kristovich, noticed only Jim's bubbles and realized Sheck's had stopped. Kristovich informed Jim's wife, Karen, and went down to check on Jim. She found him, but was surprised to see Sheck's equipment untouched. Sheck's wife wrote on underwater slate that she was going down to 250 feet to find Jim's bubbles, but sadly, she found none. Jim's wife, Karen, joined her at 150 feet, crying and with a messed up mask. Jim saw Karen's gauge showing 278 feet, so he had to keep her underwater for over 40 minutes to decompress. It was a very sad and lonely time for them. Later, Jim found out Sheck was lost when he reached the 60-foot stop. The rest of the decompression was long and painful for him. He never imagined Sheck wouldn't make it out alive. On April 7, 1994, Kristovich and the dive team returned to the sinkhole to recover equipment. Sheck's gear was heavy and tied tightly around his arms. Using a pulley, they slowly brought up the equipment. After 2 days, Sheck's lifeless body surfaced, still tied to his gear. The moment was heart-wrenching, a painful reminder of the dangers of deep cave exploration. The reason for Exley's death remains a mystery. Some think it could be due to the stress of diving deep and the effects of nitrogen. Also, Exley's tank valves were wrapped with a line, possibly to make it safer for recovery if something happened to him. As we conclude this video, let's remember Sheck Exley's courage and love for exploration, a true pioneer of deep-sea exploration. His final dive serves as a poignant reminder of the risks and challenges that come with exploring the depths of our oceans. Let us honor his legacy by continuing to explore and discover, but always with safety and caution in mind. Have you ever felt the thrill of exploring a hidden world? Deep beneath the surface, caves offer a glimpse into a secret kingdom of glistening rock formations and silent pools. But this mysterious beauty can hold a dark secret. Cave diving, the daring adventure of venturing underwater into these hidden caverns, is an activity that pushes the limits of human exploration. However, it can also be a dance with death. Today, we're diving into the tragic story of Simon Halliday, an experienced cave diver who lost his life in the treacherous waters of Lancaster Hole, England. Lancaster Hole is no ordinary cave. It's a gateway to the vast three-county system, a labyrinth of underwater passages stretching for miles. This complex system is a playground for expert cave divers, but even for the most skilled, it can become a deadly trap. In January 2020, Simon became another victim of the unforgiving nature of cave diving. This wasn't just a random accident. Reports suggest Simon might have been using unproven equipment, a rebreather that failed him in the unforgiving depths. This raises chilling questions. Was it a malfunction, a human error, or something more sinister? Join us as we explore the thrilling world of cave diving. We'll uncover what went wrong at Lancaster Hole. This isn't just Simon Halliday's story. It's a warning for anyone who dreams of exploring caves. Even the most skilled divers face risks, and underestimating them can be deadly. So get ready for a ride filled with surprises, fear, and ultimately the bravery of those who dare to explore the unknown. Simon Halliday, a 49-year-old resident of Clitheroe, Lancashire, was no stranger to the thrill of cave diving. After a break, he had recently reignited his passion for the sport during a trip to Egypt. He was a respected member of the northern section of the cave diving group, CDG, a community dedicated to the safe exploration of underwater caves. The three-county system is a huge maze of caves under Cumbria, Lancashire, and the Yorkshire Dales. It's a challenging place for experienced cave divers. Lancaster Hole is the entrance to this hidden world, but only the most skilled and prepared divers should go further. Cave diving is different from regular diving. There's no easy way to swim up to the surface. Divers have to move through narrow passages, using special gear and careful planning to come back safely. In the three-county system, there's a part called the downstream passage that cave divers found fascinating. It went about 900 meters past a deep pool of water called a sump. This area was mostly unexplored, tempting adventurous divers like Simon with the chance to find something new. On that fateful day in January, Simon, along with two friends, David McDonough and Kevin Gannon, embarked on an expedition to explore further into the downstream passage. Simon told them that his solo dive wouldn't last more than 3 hours, as reported in the inquest at Cockermouth Coroner's Court by the Westmoreland Gazette. Simon had the necessary equipment and gases to navigate the treacherous environment. He was using a rebreather that was still being developed and wasn't sold commercially. He got it from a sporting goods company called Sump UK. However, when the 4-hour mark arrived and Simon hadn't surfaced, his friends David McDonough and Kevin Gannon knew something was wrong. Tragedy struck during the dive. Simon Halliday never resurfaced. They called for help. Search and rescue efforts began immediately. Rescue diver Anthony Seddon entered the underwater passage and found Simon deceased about 14 minutes and 60 meters into the dive. When Simon was recovered, the oxygen supply pipe from his rebreather appeared to be disconnected or ripped out. This could have happened during the dive or while recovering his body. Data from Simon's dive computers suggested his rebreather malfunctioned, forcing him to switch to his backup air supply. The exact reason for the malfunction remains unclear. One possibility was equipment failure. Rebreathers, while useful, are complex and require careful maintenance and configuration for each dive. A malfunction could have left Simon without a reliable source of breathing gas. Another possibility is getting stuck. The narrow passages in the downstream passage could be dangerous. If his diving gear got caught on a rock or something else, he might not have been able to get loose. The unforgiving environment itself is another factor. Cave diving requires divers to manage their air supplies very carefully. Any unexpected delays or problems can quickly deplete their reserves, leaving them with no way to reach the surface. The inquest also revealed that this was not Simon's first time on this dive. However, his team noted that there was more water flowing through the passage than usual on January 4th. Simon didn't see this as a problem, but the stronger current may have used up more air on his return journey as he fought against it. This problem could have been worse if Simon was under stress and breathing heavily because his air was running low. The increasing emptiness of his air canisters would have also made him more buoyant, forcing him to use more energy to stay down in the passage and avoid hitting the roof. Simon Halliday's story is a tribute to a passionate cave diver who lost his life doing what he loved. It's also a reminder of the importance of respecting and preparing for the challenges of cave diving. Cave divers boldly explore new frontiers, armed with careful planning and an understanding of the dangers, all driven by a desire for discovery. Dive into the depths of Plura Cave, where a group of divers embarked on an adventures dive that ended in sorrow. Meet Jari Huotarinen and Jari Usimaki, two divers of the group whose exploration took a tragic turn, leaving the world stunned. In this gripping video, we unravel the mystery behind their ill-fated dive, exploring the dangers hidden beneath the surface. We'll explore the chilling details of what happened, the dangers that hidden in the depths, and the fight for survival against the unforgiving cave. So, join us as we uncover Plura's dark secret, a tale of courage, tragedy, and the enduring spirit of exploration. Plura is a cave in Rana, Norway. It is the deepest cave in northern Europe. People like to scuba dive in Plura, a cave system that is more popular than any other cave diving spot in Scandinavia. Visibility in the cave waters is high. The cave's passages were formed by the flow of the Plura River rocks like limestone, and there are even beautiful marble formations inside. A number of species have been identified in the cave ecosystem. On a crisp day of 6th February in 2014, two adventurous divers, Patrick Grongvist and Jari Huotarinen, braved the icy waters of Plura. They chopped a triangle ice hole. Wearing special waterproof suits and gear, they went into the freezing water. They waited 2 hours for the water to clear up a bit after swirling the sand and dirt at the bottom. Then, 3 of their friends, Vesa Rantanen, Kai Kankkonen, and Jari Usamaki, also suited up, went in for their turn to explore the underwater world. The destination for all 5 men was Steenuglaflaget. They were Finnish divers who knew one another from explorations they had made. The first diver to set off was Patrick Gronqvist, who had discovered the passage between the caves the year before, diving with his good friend Jari Huotarinen, who was attempting the traverse for the first time. Around an hour into their dive, after passing the deepest part of the cave, which was 110 meter deep, Gronqvist noticed something was wrong. He couldn't see his friend Huotarinen following him anymore. He turned back and found him trapped in a narrow spot. A cord from his diving gear was tangled up and holding him stuck. Huotarinen was using his light to try and signal for help. Huotarinen panicked, making his breathing quick and dangerous. Gronqvist gave him a cylinder of gas to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, but while switching, Huotarinen started helplessly swallowing water and tragically died. Devastated, Gronqvist knew panicking would hurt him too. He forced himself to stay calm and tried to free Huotarinen, but eventually had to focus on his own survival. The first diver in the second team was Vesa Rantanen. Rantanen found Gronqvist, but struggle to pass Huotarinen's body took too long. Low on gas, Rantanen had to surface early, causing him to get the bends. Bad pains that started mild, but worsened quickly. Rantanen later found that while he had been struggling to pass Huotarinen's body, the diver Jari Usamaki was also running into difficulties. Norwegian police believe Usamaki panicked after he reached the scene of the first accident. The last diver, Kankkonen, tried to help Usamaki but couldn't. Kankkonen, the last diver, knew things were bad. He decided not to continue deeper, but instead turned around and swam the long way back to the starting point. He took a long way to swim back and finally emerged from the cave over 11 hours later. He reached the Plura. In the early hours of the next day, he had to break a thin layer of ice to climb out of the water. The remaining 3 divers, Patrick Gronqvist, Vesa Rantanen, and Kai Kankkonen, though shaken, managed to navigate back to the surface. However, the story wasn't over. The 3 survivors were all hospitalized with decompression sickness. The Norwegian authorities took statements from them and closed the Plura cave. As you can see, the Plura Grotto cave incident wasn't just about the equipment malfunction. It highlights the extreme dangers of cave diving. Even the most experienced divers face unseen challenges in the dark and narrow passages. Remember, cave diving requires top-notch training, the right gear, and a clear plan. Most importantly, divers need to stay calm and think clearly in emergencies. The Plura Grotto incident serves as a learning experience for all adventurers. It emphasizes that pushing limits can have devastating consequences. While the allure of exploration is strong, prioritizing safety comes first. This story isn't just about the tragedy, but also the bravery of the survivors. It showcases the deep respect and the strong community spirit that exists within the diving world. Have you ever heard of a place so beautiful it can be deadly? Vortex Spring in Florida is a diver's paradise, but it holds a chilling secret. In 2010, a young man named Ben McDaniel vanished without a trace. He entered a dark cave system, and despite a massive search effort, he was never seen again. This case is more than just a missing person. Experienced cave divers scoured the depths, but found nothing. Was there foul play, or did something strange happen within the hidden underwater labyrinth? Join us as we explore the mysterious disappearance of Ben McDaniel. We'll dive deep into the investigation, uncover puzzling clues, and explore the theories that continue to baffle authorities. Is this a tragic accident or something more sinister? Deep in Florida lies Vortex Spring, a natural wonder known for its incredible water. This spring is a giant, powerful source pumping out millions of gallons of crystal clear, cool water every day. Imagine diving into a 200-foot deep pool, sunlight sparkling through the water, but the adventure doesn't stop there. Vortex Spring hides a secret world beneath the surface, a network of caves stretching out for over 1,600 feet. This unique feature makes Vortex Spring a popular spot for divers of all levels. Beginners can learn the ropes in shallow areas, while experienced divers can explore the deeper caverns. The story begins in August 2010. Ben, a 30-year-old certified diver from Tennessee, was spending time at his family's beach house near Vortex Spring. This natural wonder is a popular spot for scuba enthusiasts due to its crystal-clear waters and underwater caverns. On August 18th, Ben was seen by employees at the spring's dive shop. He geared up and ventured into a known cave system, 58 feet below the surface. However, unlike usual, Ben never resurfaced. Alarms went off when Ben's truck remained parked at the shop for 2 days. A massive search operation began, with teams of experienced cave divers scouring the underwater labyrinth. Despite weeks of effort, there was no sign of Ben. When Ben's truck remained parked at the shop for 2 days, alarm bells started ringing. A big search operation launched. The best divers, suited up with strong lights and special gear for breathing underwater, were called in to explore the maze-like caves. Weeks passed, and these expert divers looked everywhere they could safely go, but Ben remained missing. It was strange. No clue at all, even after such a thorough search by the most skilled divers in the country with most advanced equipment. This only added to the confusion and made the whole situation even more mysterious. Authorities initially suspected an accident. Cave diving is inherently dangerous, requiring specialized training and equipment. Even a small problem with your gear or getting lost in the dark and tight spaces can be deadly. But here's where things get strange. The divers involved in the search were highly skilled. They expressed strong doubts that Ben's body remained within the explored cave system. Maybe Ben got stuck in a tight spot or swam too far and couldn't find his way back. He might have had a problem with his air or just gotten lost. Some things weren't quite right though. While searching, they found 2 air tanks belonging to Ben near the cave entrance. This confused some folks. Usually, cave divers leave extra air tanks throughout the cave to help them find their way back out safely. But Ben's tanks were just at the start. Also, the air in the tanks wasn't the special mix needed for deep dives. Something Ben likely knew if he was planning a serious cave exploration, as his family mentioned. On Sunday, August 22nd, there were still no signs of Ben. A text was sent to Ed Sorensen, a skilled cave diver with lots of experience. Even though he was far away in the Bahamas, he came to Vortex Springs the next day. Some people warned him it was too risky to search deeper into the cave, but Sorensen didn't give up. He made 3 dives that day, going further than Ben had ever mapped. Despite his efforts, he found nothing. No body or evidence that Ben had been there. Sorensen explained that Ben was taller and heavier than him, and without proper training, it would have been impossible for him to navigate the narrow passages in the cave. He was confident Ben wasn't in there. In March 2012, when the reward for finding Ben had reached $30,000, the worst fears of the cave divers came true. Just 2 days before a TV show about Ben's disappearance was set to air, tragedy struck again at Vortex Spring. Larry Higginbotham, a diver from Biloxi, Mississippi, lost his life in the cavern. His body was discovered the next day after he didn't return from a dive. One of the divers who found him said he must have gotten stuck and couldn't find his way out. The disappearance of Ben McDaniel at Vortex Spring remains an unsolved puzzle. Despite extensive searches and years passing, Ben hasn't been found. This case serves as a chilling reminder of the risks involved in cave diving and the importance of prioritizing safety. Ben's family continues their search for answers, and any new information, however small, could be crucial. The underwater world holds immense beauty, but it also harbors hidden dangers. The story of Ben McDaniel is a cautionary tale and a testament to the enduring power of unsolved mysteries. On a small road in rural Bulgaria, but this unassuming hole in the ground opens into the longest cave in the country. One day, a group of 4 professional splunkers and 3 kids ventured into the cold, dark depths of the cave. In the dead of night, their trip turned into a nightmare, trapped below ground. What followed was the largest rescue in Bulgaria's history. This is the story of the Dulata Cave Rescue. Bulgaria is a small, lesser-known country on the western border of the Black Sea. On the opposite side of the country, the Vitosha mountain towers over the Bulgarian plains, with its highest point reaching an elevation of over 7,500 feet high. Vitosha is a great spot for winter sports like skiing, and hikers come here to marvel at the area's many wonders like the golden stone bridges, the icy Black Peak, and the mountain's tiered waterfalls. The mountain formed when faults in the planet's crust bent into one another, forcing huge sections of rock into the sky without disrupting the internal structure of the plates. Over time, glaciers carved a path through the nearby valleys, creating a vast network of tunnels that bore into the mighty stone of the mountain. Dulata is named for the sound of wind blowing through the entrance in the wintertime, and it's the longest cave in Bulgaria with a total length pushing past 11 miles underground. Dulata also snakes down 174 feet below ground. Formed by the Struma River, Dulata is a complex labyrinth extending across 6 different levels, with all the classic hallmarks of a world-class cave, including lakes and unique speleothems like the whale, the stonehead, the Synthrovo basement, and the underground lake of Ayazmoto. Dulata is also home to a variety of 22 different animal species like translucent snails, scorpions, worms, and 6 different species of cave bats. Cavers of almost any skill level can tackle Dulata, but you'll need to prove you've gone caving before to gain entry. There are easy passages that only take a few hours to explore, and there are more technical routes for experts. The longest route goes all the way from the first entrance ever found to the newest entrance. This route can take roughly 10 hours to complete, even for highly skilled, fast-moving caver. In 2010, a team of 4 adult cavers gathered together to explore Dulata. Together, they had over 20 years of experience exploring caves and documenting their findings. The team also brought 3 less experienced cavers with them to show them the ropes. The 3 kids ranged from 11 to 14 years old. The kids had practiced climbing, and they wanted to challenge themselves by climbing the vertical sections of Dulata's cold stone maze. The team showed the mayor of Bosnik their credentials and received the key to open the cave's large metal gate. They began their journey at around 8 p.m. at night. The entrance to Dulata is a pothole that descends down right at ground level. The cave is situated directly off the side of a road, and for the uninitiated, it's easy to mistake Dulata as a storm or drainage gate. The experienced cavers guided the kids through the entrance to Dulata. This portion can be one of the most challenging parts of the trip for adults. This section is a narrow crawl that extends into some slanted portions that descend further underground. Some tours will tackle this section without ropes, which can be fine for areas with boulders, but portions with smooth stone can easily become slippery and difficult to manage. This portion continued until the cavers reached the first of 6 rivers intersecting the cave at this first level. Nearby resides a pathway that visitors often explore during cave tours. Across a narrow cliff high above a drop, the pathway leads to gorgeous rooms with unique formations. As they explored, bats flew overhead. Known nowadays as the carrier of the virus that wreaked havoc on humans in late 2019, bats are also the most common carrier of rabies in several countries around the world. Their thin teeth can make it hard for some people to even feel their bite. Exposed individuals may think the bat simply brushed against them or got too close with their spiked claws. Bites are even harder to notice with thick caving gear on. They took cover and waited for the creatures to pass by. The group ducked through more narrow crawlways and shuffled through thin gaps along the walls. They ventured deeper. As they passed more underground rivers, the adults began to notice the rivers were getting faster. Their flows spilled over their natural streams that had been carved into the rock over the centuries. They noted this down and kept exploring. Eventually, the waters were so forceful and vast that they couldn't safely pass through. Above ground, the unique geography of the mountain valley created a sudden storm that dumped huge amounts of rain. Prior to their entry, the night sky had shrouded the horizons in the coming storm. The cavers had no idea this dangerous flood was coming. The rivers and pathways that fed into Dulata were overflowing from the sudden deluge, and below ground, the team noticed that water levels were rising. As the storm raged on, the mayor realized the team was in dire straits and called for help. Emergency personnel contacted Bulgaria's civil defense teams and the Cave Rescue Bulgaria team, which has around 65 cavers and 5 medical staff. Once rescuers arrived, they were split into teams. The first team included a commander to oversee the operations from an above-ground camp. In the UK and other parts of Europe, these leaders are dubbed wardens or controllers, while in the US, these rescuers are called incident commanders. Wardens are assigned after emergency response has been reached, and they cooperate with police for the rest of the rescue. Once the warden arrives at the site, they will find the person who called for the rescue party to gather more details. The warden of the Dulata cave rescue was Atanas Russe. He quickly formed a search team to begin locating the trapped cavers. They faced hardships almost immediately. Since Dulata's entrance was at ground level and directly open to the sky, water was pouring into the entrance. Instead of lubricating the crawl space, making it easier to enter, the water dragged mud into the crevice, making it harder to pass through. Water levels pouring from the entrance made it difficult to breathe as teams pushed through. To aid the first team of rescuers, support staff used water pumps to limit the amount of water flowing into the cave. The shouts of workers rose above the rain as the pump's machinery hummed in the ears of the rescuers, making communication difficult, if not impossible. A communications team was already being developed. They would use a combination of tactics to ensure the underground teams could communicate with the surface, including hand signals between the cavers, handheld radios, and military field phones. Military field phones are often used for rescues. They're durable, easy to use, and easy to acquire. To use field phones, communications team members would bring spools of wire with them into the cave along with a field phone. This wire reached up to the communications control center at the rescue camp, and the switch box above ground could even connect to civilian phone lines and override their connections, giving them direct and uninterrupted access to emergency communications networks. Wireless devices, like cell phones, don't work well in these wilderness environments. Mountain trails, like those near the cave, don't get good reception. At best, they might get 3G speeds on a good day, but usually they get slower speeds if they get any reception at all. The mountains along either side of the valley could block reception from reaching the camp, and the storm also created interference. After learning the trap team had 4 expert cavers, rescuers felt confident that the team would be safe. Rescuers bet that the cavers would know to immediately seek higher ground to avoid the rising waters. They still worked quickly, but their misplaced confidence could easily backfire. They had no way of knowing the situation below ground. On the way down, the team could have passed dozens of subterranean rivers, and if any one of them was too strong, they'd be trapped, sandwiched with certain death on either side. Rescuers would search for the team along major routes inside the cave, including the beginner tour route along the cliff near the entrance. They would also look for bypasses to go around flooded areas to reach the cavers without risking their lives by traversing through raging rivers. If they found a good bypass, they could save hours of precious time and possibly even use that pathway to safely extract the cavers. Some members of the search team affixed ropes around stalagmites that were solidly anchored to the ground. That way, if ropes needed to be used, they could avoid drilling into the cave and damaging the natural structures. Up above, rescuers continued to arrive at the encampment. If anyone located the cavers, they would need a fresh team ready to depart at a moment's notice. But they still needed a round-the-clock search. To achieve their goals, the controller divided volunteer cavers into 2 additional groups so that search parties could work in shifts. Geological engineers assessed maps and the flow of the Struma River. They considered diverting the river or damming it to dramatically lower the water levels in the cave, but the task would be a huge undertaking, and the necessary equipment could take a long time to arrive. One of the rescuers brought up this possibility while rescuers were attempting to enter Dulata. Other teams agreed this could be a problem, so they called for bulldozers or excavators. At this time, even though Bulgaria's cave rescue team was a member of the European Speleological Federation, the Bulgarian government lacked an official connection with the caving groups. Russe, the warden, was overruled by the civil defense commanders, and his request for an excavator was denied. It took 3 tries as the veteran caver pleaded with officials before he got fed up and hired an excavator himself. In the middle of the night, the owner of the machine finally brought a backhoe to break open the resurgence. They brought the heavy machinery to the resurgent spring where the underground rivers exit the cave back above ground. Average excavators use hydraulics and heavy metal buckets capable of lifting around 4,200 pounds. But the largest machines used in mining operations can lift almost 10 times as much weight. The excavator they had on hand smashed through the tranquil springs that so many travelers had taken photos with during hikes. They removed the broken rubble to widen the mouth of the exit, allowing more water to pour from Dulata. Hopefully, this would decrease the overall water levels of the cave, buying the trapped cavers more time. If they were stuck between rivers, this maneuver could lower the underground rivers just enough for them to pass to higher ground. Investigations revealed that water levels were rising by almost an inch per minute, and the operation dragged on for hours. Eventually, over 24 hours had passed. As time went on, news began to carry all across the country. Soon, the head of the civil defense team traveled to Dulata to personally oversee the rescue effort. This event quickly became the largest rescue operation in Bulgaria's history. Shortly after being trapped for over a day underground, rescuers were able to locate the trapped speleologists. But they weren't out of danger just yet. Even though crews knew where they were, the raging flood made it impossible for rescuers to safely reach them. They estimated it would take at least another 16 hours to reach them. The trapped cavers huddled together for warmth, rationing their food supplies as the white noise of the water unceasingly poured into their ears. They bobbed in and out of consciousness as sleep deprivation gripped them. Their fear was ever present as they white-knuckled their own balled-up fists under blankets. They shook from both nervousness and the cold that was threatening to pull them into the eternal darkness of Dulata Cave. Above ground, news teams started criticizing the party for not researching the weather ahead of time. But as our stories have shown, even the most prepared cavers can find themselves in unexpected and deadly situations. After around 48 hours of rescue efforts, the cavers were brought out of Dulata, rattled but unharmed. If they hadn't been seasoned splunkers who knew the dangers of the underground world, they may have suffered life-threatening injuries or even died while trying to pass through the raging waters. In the years after the incident, Bulgarian politicians like Boyko Borisov campaigned on promises to protect caves and establish a unified mountain rescue service. But as of 2020, 10 years after the historic rescue of Dulata, rescuers still face an uphill battle with the Bulgarian government. The warden of the incident, Atanas Russe, said the operation was comparable to the world-famous Tam Luang cave rescue. If he didn't make the split-second decision to hire an excavator, it's likely all 7 cavers, adults and children, would have drowned in the waters below Dulata. Water levels rose by upwards of 50 feet over the course of the rescue. Even if they fled to higher levels, a second flood from above would have been the end of them all. Luckily, the cavers of Bulgaria banded together to save 7 lives from the raging floods below ground in Dulata Cave. Dulata is one of the best destinations for cavers traveling to Bulgaria, but along a remote stretch of coastline, more than 100 miles away from the capital city of Santo Domingo, El Dudu Lagoon is one of the finest natural attractions in the Dominican Republic. Visitors can enjoy swimming in freshwater, leaping off rocks, and even zooming across a zip line that covers the lagoon. But El Dudu is more than just an easygoing outdoor attraction. If you happen to dunk your head under the water, you'll see that the lagoon goes as deep as 66 feet. Not only that, but in its depths, the lagoon also hides a network of caves. Speleologists travel far and wide to this corner of the island so they can explore these daunting subterranean labyrinths. Sometimes, this ends in disaster. In February of 2019, the world got a startling glimpse of just how disastrous that can be, when 2 experienced divers from Italy dove confidently into the darkness beneath El Dudu Lagoon and never returned. In this video, we'll explore the horrifying demise of 2 divers, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri, and study first-hand accounts from the rescue team to try and work out what really happened on that fateful day deep below the lush forest floor of the Dominican Republic. The event. On February 9th, 2019, at around 11:45 a.m., 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri and 44-year-old Carlos Basso entered the cave system beneath the waters of El Dudu Lagoon. Both were diving enthusiasts visiting from Italy. Despite having earned a reputation for doing dangerous cave dives around the world, neither man was diving certified. Ed Sorensen, who ended up working on their rescue mission, recalls hearing that an instructor in Italy had recently told Carlos Basso that he should consider getting proper training, to which Basso allegedly replied, quote, "There is nothing you could teach me that I don't already know." Now, whether Basso actually said this or not, it seems likely that it represents both his and Barbieri's attitudes. Without the proper certification, training, or all the necessary gear, both men plunged into the caves beneath El Dudu Lagoon, brimming with confidence from all their past successes. The underwater world which awaited them was something to behold. After descending deep into the lagoon itself, the pair would have eventually reached the mouth of the cave system. After navigating through some narrow passageways, and right past a highly conspicuous warning sign, the cave system begins to open up. A huge tunnel full of pillars, stalagmites, and stalactites winds even further and further into the bowels of the earth. Further on, the two reached a room in which there is actually an air pocket. Divers can swim up and emerge from the surface of the water to breathe fresh air, despite being located far below the surface of the lagoon where the journey began. The cave system winds and descends much, much further than this. Ambitious divers, which Basso and Barbieri both certainly were, can swim for a total of 45 minutes before finally reaching the end of the cave system. Much of the rest of the journey is significantly narrower and more cramped than the beginning. Unusually, the end of the line in El Dudu actually leads up to an alternative exit different from the place you entered, called Cueva de Lili. Divers exiting the cave via this route can expect to see bats, tarantulas, scorpions, and snakes. But whether they had planned on braving the creepy critters or not, Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso never made it there. The search. By mid-afternoon, the pair had still not re-emerged from the water. That's when word traveled to Philip Lehman. Lehman is the vice president of the Dominican Republic Speleological Society, or DRSS. Concerned, Lehman enlisted the help of a colleague named Angel Compres, and together the pair traveled to El Dudu. At the time, neither Lehman nor Compres knew what part of the cave system to look in. All they knew was that two divers were inside somewhere and they were probably in trouble. This was a daunting task given how vast El Dudu is. The first thing Lehman and Compres noticed upon entering the water was that a lot of silt had been stirred up. These fine particles can reduce visibility in underwater spaces to such a degree that it can be literally impossible to see anything in certain areas. This was obviously a hamper to their search, but it was also a clue. Silt can often be a factor or even a direct cause of many diving accidents. Working on this hunch, the pair were soon joined by El Dudu management and the local authorities from Cabrera, the town El Dudu was located in. The search team cleverly used the silt as a guide, figuring where there was more silt, there was probably a higher chance of the two divers. By following this trail of stirred-up silt, they eventually found a narrow passageway with very low visibility. Here, the search team found a broken guideline. This was a telltale sign that a serious accident had taken place. Unfortunately, using the silt as a map to the diver's location was a double-edged sword. Even though it led them to their first major clue, the visibility was so bad that they soon had to temporarily call off the search. The next day, the search team tried again, but visibility remained terrible and nothing was found. This continued for several days, with still no sign of either Carlos Barbieri or Carlos Basso. Then, finally, days after Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri had gone missing, the team made their first gruesome discovery. The body of 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri was found in a side passage. He was caught, and caught so badly that even though they'd found him, the team was unable to recover his body at the time. According to the National Speleological Society, this side passage is very narrow and is usually only attempted by divers using side-mount gear. Barbieri didn't bring side-mount gear. Following the discovery of Carlos Barbieri, more than a week went by with virtually no progress. At this point, they decided it was time to call in additional help. That's when Mike Young and internationally renowned rescue diver Ed Sorensen were called out to the Dominican Republic. The rescue. The heroic arrival of experts Ed Sorensen and Mike Young were interrupted in transit by an unexpected setback. Upon arriving at the border of the Dominican Republic, local authorities told the two men they weren't allowed into the country. This, while Carlos Barbieri's body remained lodged in the side passage, and Carlos Basso remained missing in the depths of the El Dudu cave system. In a report later published by the National Speleological Society, the reason for this is sort of strange. Apparently, the government was not only aware of the diving accident, but aware of the fact that the rescue mission was ongoing, and had been for well over a week. But they were wary of letting two American rescue divers in to help. because they assumed if it had taken this long already, the operation must have been way too dangerous. After some hasty negotiations, and maybe showing the local authorities his track record, Ed Sorensen and his partner Mike Young were allowed into the Dominican Republic. However, they were allowed in on one condition. They only had 8 days to recover both bodies. After 8 days, the authorities would call off the search for good. Recounting the story later, Sorensen describes how he brought special harnesses with which to extract the bodies. These harnesses were designed to wrap around at numerous different points on the body, for the horrific reason that, after being trapped and submerged for so many days, they may not come out in one piece. Due to the silt and the labyrinth-like nature of the cave system, Sorensen describes how he explored the cave. He held onto his guideline with one hand and held his other hand out in front of him, essentially feeling around for things that weren't made out of sand, water, or rock. He says he found the still-trapped body of Carlos Barbieri by literally bumping into him. Sorensen couldn't extract the body on his own, so he sent for the local crew to bring down a bunch of milk crates full of weights. These weights helped pull Barbieri's body down just enough to maneuver it out from under the section of the passage he was stuck in. Finally, after about 4 hours of grueling work, the deceased Barbieri had been recovered. But even now, nobody knew where the body of the younger Carlos Basso was. The day after the exhausting recovery of Carlos Barbieri, Ed Sorensen and Mike Young headed back into the cave. They continued their search in the same area, venturing slowly deeper into the very furthest depths of El Dudu. Sorensen actually reached a wall at the very back of the passageway before he found the body of Carlos Basso. Basso was down in a crevice. In order to reach him, Sorensen had to let go of the guideline. He held on to Mike Young, who held on to the guideline for both of them, while he worked with one hand to try and recover the body of Carlos Basso. Unlike the first body, this time Sorensen was able to extract the body without additional help. However, due to the extreme depths at which the body was found, the whole recovery again took approximately 4 hours. The aftermath. Even though there are some clear red flags in their story, to this day, authorities still don't know conclusively what went wrong with Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso. Overconfidence, and the fact that both men lacked proper training and proper equipment surely played a role, but the specific events that transpired to lead to their grisly demise remain the subject of speculation. The report of the incident done by the National Speleological Society speculates that, as they were nearing the end of their air supply, one of the men, either Basso or Barbieri, got tangled in the line and broke it, making them unable to find their way out. Another theory put forward is that they mistakenly began following a jump line, a different line left behind by other divers thinking it was their own. Either way, the report stresses that neither Basso nor Barbieri should have been in El Dudu in the first place, especially so deep. Not only did their lack of certification and equipment result in their own deaths, but it also left their bodies in an insane situation that put the lives of the rescue workers at risk as well. In the end, like other tragic tales of divers meeting their demise, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri serve today as a cautionary tale for divers of all experience levels to never overestimate their abilities. As the saying goes, the wolf is always at the door. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, provided you had the proper equipment and proper training, would you consider exploring the caves in El Dudu? Or would you rather stick to riding the zip line on the surface? Cave divers are famous for traveling all over the world for their dives, but there is one place that seems to attract them more than anywhere else: Florida. In the United States, Florida is like the Mecca of cave diving. That also, unfortunately, means it is something like the Mecca of death for cave divers as well. Within the state of Florida itself, there is one particular area that has a uniquely imposing stature in the minds of the diving community: the Wakala Leon Sinks cave system. This intimidating spot is actually the longest underwater cave that has ever been surveyed in the United States, and one of the longest in the world. It is also the spot where, in 2011, a diver named Jim Miller dared to journey deeper than most cave divers ever dream of going, and, due to a freak oversight, met his demise in a way that was both horrifying and unique. The Wakala Leon Sinks cave system is located near Tallahassee. This almost mythical underwater labyrinth extends a whopping 32 miles under the surface of the state of Florida, reaching astonishing depths as low as 350 feet. The cave system also boasts some remarkable features, including a massive room called Black Abyss that is 160 feet from floor to ceiling. It also houses numerous rare creatures that can only be found there, including the Woodville Karst Cave crayfish and the Florida Cave isopod. Many cave divers view this particular system with a mix of admiration and trepidation. As you might imagine, it's not for beginners. The extraordinary length and depth of the cave mean you had better know what you're doing, or you may never even be found, let alone rescued. However, for those experienced enough and brave enough to explore it, the rewards are nothing short of breathtaking. This was precisely what drew cave diver Jim Miller and two other friends to the cave system on June 11, 2011. Miller and his friends were experienced divers. Miller, in particular, had over 20 years of experience. He was also formerly a colonel in the U.S. Army. Miller knew that in order to dive such a long and deep cave system, they would need to be prepared with several different bottles of decompression gas. Decompression gas, or DECO gas for short, is a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. Depending on the mixture, DECO gas might be suitable for diving at 50 feet or diving at 150 feet. This is important. Divers who go on deep dives 100 feet and beyond need to do so gradually, especially on the ascent back up. Otherwise, they risk decompression sickness, one of the deadliest and most agonizing acute ailments you can get as a human being. For related reasons, you cannot breathe pure oxygen safely if you're more than 20 feet underwater. Therefore, the further down you go, the lower the levels of oxygen should be in your DECO gas mix. Due to the extreme depth they were up against, Jim Miller and his friends had each brought a total of 4 different DECO gas mixtures. One for diving down to 20 feet, one for when they reached 70 feet, one when they reached 120 feet, and a final DECO gas bottle for when they eventually reached 240 feet and below. The dive began at a section called Whiskey Still Sink. The group of 3 swam through a shallow conduit and eventually arrived at another section called Innisfree Sink. It was from this spot that the deeper descent was to begin. For the first time so far, the team all stopped so they could each switch DECO gas bottles. It was at this moment that Jim Miller made a critical mistake. He dropped one of the bottles. The metallic cylinder sank down below, eventually disappearing into the menacing darkness. Now, although it was a startling setback, Jim believed that it had probably been the bottle that was intended for 70 feet below. Although it wasn't ideal, he figured he'd be okay using the 120-foot bottle until they reached 120 feet and beyond. But he was wrong. The bottle Jim had dropped was the 240-foot bottle, the one that he would need for the very deepest recesses of the cave. Unaware of this, the group continued onward, and further downward. Soon, they switched to their 120-foot bottles. And eventually, it came time to switch from their 120-foot bottles to their 240-foot bottles. Jim Miller and his friends were now swimming at a depth way beyond the reach of any natural daylight, where few divers, however experienced, ever dare to descend. It was critical for survival that all 3 divers had brought properly prepared DECO gas bottles for this extreme depth. Breathing too much oxygen at this point could spell doom beyond all their worst nightmares. But unbeknownst to anyone at the time, Jim Miller didn't have the correct DECO gas bottle. He had dropped it without realizing which one he had dropped. Now, at the ultimate stage of the ultimate cave dive, he switched mistakenly from the 120-foot bottle to the 70-foot bottle, the one he thought he had dropped further back. Jim now thought he was breathing deco gas suitable for 240 feet, but he was actually breathing deco gas that was only suitable for 70 feet. In other words, he was breathing in more than 3 times the level of oxygen that's safe for the depth he was at. Eerily, nobody noticed anything right away as they continued their descent. Not even Jim. They continued their dive for a little under 1 hour. It was only when it came time to turn around and head back out that trouble began. And began fast. On the way out, Jim Miller suddenly succumbed to oxygen toxicity. Seemingly out of nowhere, Miller stopped and began convulsing. He was having a seizure, hundreds of feet underwater in the longest underwater cave in the country. Stunned and panicked, his friends quickly attended to the thrashing Miller, but their efforts were hopeless. Being experienced divers themselves, they may have realized what must have been happening. They would have then tried to feed Miller the correct gas mixture from one of their own rebreathers. However, this would have been impossible because Miller's jaw had locked shut due to the seizure he was having. In the end, there was simply nothing they could do. Jim Miller's horrific death sent shockwaves through the cave diving community. Many felt that Miller would have been the last person they'd expect to fall victim to an event like this. In the immediate aftermath, questions were raised about how such an accident could even happen the way it did. The first thing that was alarming to people was the fact that Miller could have dropped such a vital survival tool without him or the other 2 divers realizing it. To describe plunging to 240 feet and below without the right deco gas as a dangerous act would be a massive understatement. It virtually guaranteed Miller's demise. Yet, despite surely having opportunities to do so, nobody in the group discovered this lethal threat. Another mystery was the amount of time it took for Miller to succumb to oxygen toxicity. Miller breathed excess oxygen for nearly an hour while swimming in the darkest recesses of the cave system. How he managed to do this without experiencing any symptoms worth relaying to his colleagues is hard to answer. Experiments have shown that oxygen toxicity often hits instantly. Many experienced divers, who understandably live in fear of this deadly phenomena, had no idea it was possible for oxygen toxicity to sneak up on you so gradually until they heard Miller's story. In the end, the death of Jim Miller is a testament to the dangers of such an extreme cave system. It is also proof that no matter who you are or how well you prepare, mistakes can happen, even to the best. You truly never know which descent into the dark, beautiful waters will be your last. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, would you ever explore the Wakala-Leon-Sinks cave system? How far down do you think you could make it before fear drove you back upwards? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and please be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content like this in the near future. That's all for now. See you next time. Everyone knows that cave diving's dangerous, but most people think the danger is reserved for certified divers who venture into caves no ordinary person ever would, right? Well, not always. Today's story is an alarming example of how ordinary people with no cave diving experience can still end up in a deadly situation in an underground cave. It's the story of a scenic family outing that turned into the 5 o'clock news and a caving incident nobody, least of all the victims, saw coming. This is the story of the incident at Beware Cave in 2004. Our story begins in a remote region of Utah. About 250 miles southwest of Salt Lake City, right along the border with Nevada, there is a small camping site called Bates Family Ranch. Bates Family Ranch is a destination for lovers of the rustic outdoors. Hunters stay here. So do thrill seekers looking to ride ATVs around the Great Basin. But one of the more unique attractions on offer at this remote camping site, and the one relevant to our story today, is Crystal Ball Cave. This impressive limestone cave is the Bates family ranch's real claim to fame. First discovered in 1956, it is described as being a giant geode you can walk around in. All over the inside of the cave, from the walls to the ceiling to the floor beneath your feet, there is crystal. Not far from the ranch in Crystal Ball Cave, there is another cave, but this cave is different. Very different. No shimmering crystals or family-friendly delights here. It says it all in the cave's name. Beware Cave. In March of 2004, a group of family and friends show up at Bates Family Ranch in western Utah. Included in the group is 34-year-old Jesus Chavarria Manriquez. Manriquez is a father of 5. His family, his friends, and he are all looking to spend a few days camping, having fun, and exploring the area. At the top of their list, the group wants to make sure to book a tour of Crystal Ball Cave. The Bates family themselves offer guided tours for free to curious visitors. Day after day, they proudly display this glistening natural marvel that makes their ranch unlike any other in the world. But Jesus Manriquez is also interested in something else, something for which there are no guided tours. He wants to find Beware Cave. He's heard it mentioned that Beware Cave is in fact the source of a freshwater spring, where the water is always a cozy 81 degrees Fahrenheit. He's determined to find it for himself. On Tuesday, March 23rd, Manriquez and his family and friends set out from Bates Family Ranch and begin the journey toward the ominous-sounding cave. They've been told it's not far, less than 2 miles. Re-emerging from the campsite reminds Manriquez and the others just how out in the wilderness they really are. The ranch is surrounded by mostly arid-looking land, sitting like a small oasis on the edge of the vast Great Basin. They drive up a winding dirt road for several minutes. A rocky peak with a distinctive shape called Spring Mountain grows taller in the foreground. They almost appear to be about to drive right up the side of it, but then they reach a sharp bend in the road. Soon, they realize it's a loop, with a gravel turnout at the apex. This is the spot. Pulling over and parking in the turnout, the group gets out and ambles toward the edge of the road, which faces the slope. Smiles quickly break out. Right by the edge of this spot along the road, there's a small body of water. It looks like a swimming pool built by nature. There's even a small waterfall trickling in on one side. But amazingly, Manriquez and the others soon discover this pool is in fact only the middle pool of a group of 3. A smaller one, roughly the size and shape of a jacuzzi, sits further up the hill. Down below, there's also a narrower pool with a steady flowing current. As family and friends begin swimming in the surprisingly warm and friendly waters of this remote oasis, Manriquez notices one other very crucial feature of the middle pool. At the other end of it, there is a cave. There are no signs marking it, but nevertheless he knows this must be it. This must be the mysterious Beware Cave. Manriquez turns to his family and friends, who are all playing or relaxing in the pool. "I'm going to explore the cave," he says. He appears to be alone in his interest. No one else joins him on his quest, although they do express interest in hearing whatever it is he sees on the inside. Manriquez turns back again and begins wading his way through the water toward the opening. The water's only about 3 to 4 feet deep. He doesn't even have to swim. The opening to the cave is draped in greenery, giving it the appearance of a tropical environment. It's a striking juxtaposition to the dry, rural environment they're actually in. Ducking below the overhanging rocks, Manriquez finds a snaking pathway leading deeper and deeper toward the core of the mountain. Intrigued, he carefully edges on. But after only about 10 feet, the ceiling of the cave meets the water. He's blocked off. Skeptical, Manriquez dunks his head below the water and tries to make out what he sees. It looks like there's an opening. Maybe he can swim through it. If it goes too far and never resurfaces, he'll turn around and come back the way he came. It's risky, but Manriquez is healthy, young, and confident he can handle himself. Upon a second look, he sees that the blockage is really a kind of curtain formed by stalactites. Maybe all he has to do is dip under the stalactites and right away he'll be in breathable airspace once more. Enriquez takes a few deep breaths and plunges under the water. What he finds on the other side of the stalactites is not only more breathable air, but 30 more feet of winding underground tunnel. However, it's so dark that he has no chance of continuing. He has to return to the outside world, at least momentarily. Maybe someone has a Ziploc bag he can put his phone into and use as a flashlight. Maybe, upon hearing what he's found, his family and friends will want to join him after all. Enriquez swims back underneath the blockage and reemerges from the cave. "You guys have got to check this out," he hollers. As he'd hoped, Enriquez returns to Beware Cave with family and friends in tow. One by one, they follow his lead and swim underneath the stalactite blockade. As they wander through the ever-winding tunnel, feeling like the cast of a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Enriquez and others reportedly start collecting rocks. The scene is remarkable. It's hard to believe that only minutes ago they were out in the desert in western Utah. It's like they've all suddenly been transported to another planet. But soon enough, members of the group start to grow uneasy. The tunnel is narrow and uncomfortably cramped. Just how far does this mysterious passageway actually go? Just how sure can they be that the water level is going to stay where it is? Enriquez's friends and family say they're turning back. Enriquez is initially disappointed, but he relents. They motion for Enriquez to come with them, but he declines. He says he wants to do more exploring and to collect more rocks. Shrugging, his friends and family turn back and start making their way out of the cave, carrying the rocks they've collected with them. "Don't be too long," they warn him. After coming back out into daylight, they spend the next few minutes reacquainting themselves with the pool and tranquil scenery. But a few more minutes go by. Then a few more. Jesus Chavarria Enriquez still has not returned. That afternoon, cave management is alerted that there may be an emergency situation. Wasting no time, rescue workers rush to the scene. There, they find the panicked friends and family of Jesus Chavarria Enriquez. Entering the cave, rescuers must contend with the same stalactite formation. They wind their way down the same otherworldly tunnel. Eventually, they find him. 34-year-old Enriquez is unconscious and he's not breathing. His body is wedged in the passage. Amid the sinister flashing of ambulance lights, Enriquez's friends and family are told that he has been pronounced dead, the victim of an apparent drowning. This devastating news breaks across the region, with promises of more information once it becomes available. Yet even today, answers remain undiscovered as to the exact nature of Enriquez's untimely death. Special attention has been given to the stalactite blockage which had to be traversed underwater, and understandably so. It increased the degree of danger at least tenfold. But was that really the reason why Enriquez drowned? Based on the available reports, it seems unlikely. According to an entry in the National Speleological Society database of caving accidents, Enriquez was found, quote, wedged in the passage by the force of the water. Now, it's not quite clear what that really means, and no other reports from the time seem to say anything other than simply that the man drowned, as if that's sufficiently self-explanatory. It surely brings no comfort to the friends and family who were witness to this tragic accident that Enriquez's death remains partially shrouded in mystery. Despite the name, Beware Cave, the cave and the spring pools outside of it continue to attract families to this day. Many of them even explore the same tunnel that claimed the life of Jesus Chavarria Enriquez. In the end, Enriquez's death goes to show that caving disasters are indeed not the sole experience of self-identified cavers. Ordinary people, in seemingly ordinary circumstances, can still wander into deadly danger, and may not even realize it until it is too late. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. For fishing enthusiasts in North Florida, Merritt's Mill Pond is a popular spot for catching red ear fish and largemouth bass. But even though this is what the area is best known for, most people don't realize there is something else hiding just beneath its serene surface. Caves. 7 diveable ones, in fact. In the late spring of 2020, North Florida residents who didn't know about these hidden caves soon found out about them, because something newsworthy happened in one of them, and it seemed to have come straight out of a nightmare. This is the terrifying story of Clyde Douglas Rorex and his mysterious death at Hole-in-the-Wall Cave. The event. Hole-in-the-Wall Cave is easy to miss if you're just casually floating around Merritt's Mill Pond and don't know what to look for. But tucked in a corner, amid trees and shrubbery, there is a very small dock. To many visitors, it probably seems like it's in the middle of nowhere and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But this is the spot. Just below this dock is an opening in the underwater backside of the pond. Difficult to see even if your boat is floating right above it. On June 9th, 2020, this is the same dock where experienced cave diver Clyde Douglas Rorex would have parked his boat and begun assembling his diving gear. Rorex was a North Florida local. He knew the area well and had been on similar cave dives many times before, including the one he was about to attempt solo. Rorex was prepared to dive in what is known as a side mount configuration, which many diving experts advocate as a safe and stable method. Since Rorex was diving alone, no one knows exactly when he first entered the water and made his initial descent into the cave. But alarm bells were soon raised when he failed to return at the expected time. The owner of a nearby dive shop called Cave Adventures was immediately notified. The dive shop owner's name was Ed Sorensen, and as luck would have it, he is one of the most revered cave rescue divers in the world. Ed is often called when someone, somewhere, goes missing in an underwater cave. That quiet day in early June was no different. Sorensen gathered his equipment, leapt into his truck, and drove out to Merritt's Mill Pond, unknowingly diving headfirst in what would turn out to be a tragedy that would prove difficult to explain. The recovery. The first thing Sorensen would have found when he approached Hole-in-the-Wall Cave was Clyde Douglas Rorex's boat, still tied up to the small dock with nobody in it. Finding space to maneuver his own boat around Rorex's and tie it up, Sorensen quickly put on his diving gear and entered the water. Unlike many other caves around the world, finding even the entrance to Hole-in-the-Wall Cave requires searching around underwater. Roughly 10 feet below the surface, near the dock, you'll find it. Initially, the cave is quite narrow and shows no signs of being anything more than a small hole in the wall of the pond, hence the name. But as experienced divers know, and Ed Sorensen knew as he made his way into the tunnel, everything inside changes after a few more yards. Sorensen first had to pass by an infamous warning sign, the likes of which are posted in numerous popular diving caves around the world. It features an image of the Grim Reaper and reminds divers there is nothing in this cave worth dying for. Sorensen passed by this sign and swam further into the cave, risking his life so that he might save the life of another diver. Shortly after the Grim Reaper sign, Hole-in-the-Wall Cave suddenly changes from a shallow, narrow passageway into what looks at first like a big room. That is, until you look down. The room has no floor. It's what divers call a chimney. And the chimney in Hole-in-the-Wall Cave is a nearly straight 85-foot drop down to the cave floor. Having braved such conditions under such circumstances before, Sorensen would have been steeling his resolve in preparation to descend into the dark abyss and search for the missing diver. But, to his surprise and the later perplexion of many, Sorensen entered the cave to find what he was looking for easily and quickly. The dead body of Clyde Douglas Rorex was floating not far from the entrance. The aftermath. Extracting Rorex's body from the cave proved a relatively simple task. Sadly, there was nothing Ed Sorensen or any other medical personnel could do. Rorex had died before anybody had arrived. The challenge instead became explaining what went wrong. When he was found, Rorex still had one of his diving regulators in his mouth. Both of the cylinders he was wearing were completely empty. An examination was done on all the equipment Rorex had been using that day, but strangely, nobody was able to find anything that wasn't working properly. Another valuable source of information was Rorex's computer. Rorex used his computer to plan out and keep records of his dives, and his dive at Hole in the Wall that day was no different. His computer records showed that his total dive time that day was supposed to be approximately 45 minutes. Based on the rate at which he typically consumes air, Rorex had accordingly brought enough gas to last as long as 90 minutes underwater. Clearly, this meant something had gone dramatically wrong with Rorex's plan. But what? Another piece of information Rorex's computer records provided was a profile of his actual dive. Looking at changes in depth, investigators were able to see when Rorex turned around and started swimming back the way he came. Conspicuously, there was an 11 to 12 minute period where Clyde Douglas Rorex stayed at the same depth. Then, immediately after this 11 to 12 minute period, Rorex turned around and tried to make his way back out of the cave. What was he doing for those 11 to 12 minutes? Was he just taking in the scenery before heading back? Or did something more sinister take place? Since nobody could find any faults with Rorex's equipment that day, the best explanation Ed Sorensen could work out was that Rorex had maybe gotten stuck or tangled in his line, or something to that effect, and in wrestling to free himself, he used up a bunch of his extra air. Sorensen speculated that if this entrapment theory were true, he would be able to find evidence of it if he ventured back into the cave the next day. Specifically, he believed there would be major slit disturbances in the area where Rorex got stuck. Hole-in-the-Wall cave does not have a strong water flow inside it, and there aren't a huge number of places where a diver is likely to get stuck. The silt would still be lingering, and there would be evidence on the cave floor as well. This might lead to further evidence that would explain just what happened to Clyde Douglas Rorex. Sorensen dove back into the cave the following day, this time hunting for clues. Knowing the cave well, he focused on all the major areas where a diver might get trapped. But after nearly running out of his own air supply, conducting a thorough search up and down, Sorensen was unable to find any silt disturbances. In fact, he was unable to find any evidence of a struggle at all. Clyde Douglas Rorex's unexpected death was ruled an accidental drowning. But beyond that, it remains a mystery. How did such an experienced diver, with proper working equipment and prior knowledge of the cave, meet his demise? Why did he run out of oxygen when he brought roughly twice the amount he expected he would need? And what exactly was he doing for those last 11 to 12 minutes before turning around and trying unsuccessfully to make it out of the cave alive? Why wasn't any evidence of a struggle left behind? Of all the outdoor accidents we've covered on this channel, this is one of the more difficult ones to explain. Rorex's story, like the Grim Reaper sign at the entrance, is a reminder that nobody is immune to freak accidents. He seemingly did everything right, from preparation to training to equipment. But still, something went horribly wrong that even the leading diving experts afterward couldn't really find a complete explanation for. On this channel, we've covered some of the most harrowing tales from some of the most intimidating dive sites around the world. And some of you viewers may have wondered, which is the deadliest? Is there one diving location that's more dangerous, more terrifying, more unbelievable than all the rest? The answer is yes. There is one particular dive site with more fatalities to its name than any other. More astonishing than that, no one knows for sure exactly why. Over the years, this mysterious and lethal site has witnessed some very newsworthy accidents, including the deaths of famous divers. But while the international community may be familiar with some of these isolated, high-profile stories, the locals, especially the local rescue teams, are desperate to alert the public about the larger picture. This is the larger picture. This is the incredible history and enduring mystery of Egypt's Blue Hole. To visit the deadliest dive site in the world, you have to travel to a remote region of Egypt on the country's southeastern coast. Even today, there are still only a few major roads that will take you all the way out there, and only one small airport. Along the way, for hundreds of miles, you will see almost nothing but desert. In a country with more than 100 million people living in it, this entire 23,000 square mile region only has about 600,000 of them. If you choose to drive from Cairo, it'll take you about 6.5 hours, but if you do, eventually you'll reach the small coastal town of Dahab. Historically, the first people to arrive here were the Bedouins, Arabic-speaking nomadic people who have long lived in the deserts of the Middle East. With the dramatic Sinai Mountains perched behind them and the calm waters of the Red Sea at their feet, Dahab once served as an idyllic fishing village for generations of Bedouins. However, had these Bedouins been able to fly drones or board helicopters many generations ago, they would have almost immediately noticed something very unusual about their beloved fishing town. It has a hole in it. The jagged, rocky slopes of the Sinai Mountains descend partway below the surface of the Red Sea, but then jut back inward dramatically at one specific point in the coastline. It is at this particular point where, underneath the water, a massive depression sits in the flesh of the earth. Early Bedouins can certainly be forgiven for not knowing the full extent of what was hidden just beneath them. After all, the depression is an example of a strange geological phenomena that nobody fully recognized until at least the latter half of the 20th century. It is, in fact, a submarine sinkhole. It wasn't until recent decades that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration began working alongside recreational divers and fishermen who had been saying for years that they were finding huge underwater sinkholes in various parts of the world. Even today, the NOAA, or NOAA, is still unraveling the mystery of what the Blue Hole and other sinkholes like it actually are, or how they come to exist. Their current theory is that they are similar to sinkholes on land, but they're simply located underwater. The organization admits that much is still to be learned. It is still completely unknown how many of these submarine sinkholes exist, or where they may be located around the world. The full extent of the submarine sinkhole off the coast of Dahab wasn't widely known until the late 1960s. That's because in June of 1967, war broke out between Israel and the Arab countries of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. The war was remarkably short, known to historians today as the Six-Day War. But in that short time, Israel managed to capture a swath of territory, including the Sinai Peninsula, and also uncover what many today consider the most beautiful and enchanting dive site on Earth. The Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula would last for another 15 years. In 1982, the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty was officially implemented, and Egypt finally established diplomatic relations with Israel. During the 15-year military occupation, however, the submarine sinkhole off the coast of Dahab was explored by Israeli dive teams. Right away, for the first time, the world finally awakened to the extraordinary diving location that the Blue Hole of Dahab truly is. So what makes it so extraordinary? Well, for starters, unlike many dive sites, the Blue Hole is easily accessible right from the beach. You need only wade out a few meters into the water, and you're there, close enough to remain in earshot of the people still sunning on the shore. Knee-deep in calm water, take just one step forward, and it's a 400-plus foot drop. However, this is not the way divers actually do it. The proper way to enter is from the opposite side. The entrance to the Blue Hole is up the coastline, about 200 meters away. The next thing that makes the Blue Hole so unique is what you find once you enter. What looks initially like an unassuming drop-off into shallow water becomes, after just a few feet of swimming, an open void. It doesn't matter how clean or clear your diving goggles are, you cannot see the bottom. The beginning of the diving route takes you along what is best described as an underwater canyon. Huge rocky walls surround you on either side. Below, the walls descend deeper and deeper, eventually vanishing into the blue nothingness underneath. This wide avenue leads the way forward. The bottom remains so far below as to be completely out of sight the entire time. The height is actually so intense that it's common for divers to get vertigo. Floating in space, hundreds of feet above a perilous drop, the human body and mind have only one natural instinct in this situation. Yet, for those who can withstand the gut-wrenching environment, it can be the thrill of a lifetime. But the most astonishing part of this one-of-a-kind dive site is still to come. Eventually, as intrepid divers swim their way further and further, they see, growing in the distance, something that seems almost too mystical to be real. A bluish glow, as if there is a faint light source sitting at the bottom of the ocean. As you get closer, the bluish glow soon becomes undeniable. It grows larger and brighter until it dominates your field of vision. What this supernatural entity really turns out to be is a massive archway leading into the blue hole itself. From up at the surface, almost like the pupil of some massive eye looking out towards the sun, daylight pours down through the thin layer of seawater and floods down through the chasm of the blue hole. Recreational divers who have swum this far have already been flirting with the limit of what is considered a safe depth. Now, perhaps more than 100 feet below the surface, they must contend with the fact that this glowing archway is still way, way below them. Those who have seen the archway in person all share the belief that there is something almost magically alluring about it. Upon his visit to the site, the excellent diver and TV presenter Monty Halls noted that when you first come upon it, the archway looks easy to pass through, as if the open chamber of the blue hole is inches away on the other side. In reality, the archway is nearly 100 feet across. The blue light is so intense that it shines out across even that long distance, creating the illusion that it is much shorter than it really is. After descending to a depth of over 400 feet and passing through this incredible archway, divers rise through the glowing vertical tunnel and emerge back into daylight at the main opening of the blue hole. The entire dive, from start to finish, carries you a mere 250 meters along the shoreline. Now, while undeniably one of the most uniquely beautiful sights in the world, it is also unusually simple and straightforward. In fact, some in the technical diving community have made the claim that the blue hole should be one of the safest dive sites in the world. But it isn't. The rocky outcroppings near the entrance are littered with signs. Little makeshift tombstones with name after name after name after name. In fact, the total death count is unconfirmed, but ask a local Bedouin diver named Tariq Omar, who has been conducting body recoveries at the Blue Hole for decades, and he'll tell you that well over 100 people have died in the Blue Hole. Some divers familiar with the area even estimate as many as 200. This means the Blue Hole is by far the most lethal diving site on Earth. No cursed Mexican cenote nor dizzying Florida sinkhole even comes close to the rate of death that this wide, straight 250-meter stretch of Egyptian coastline somehow has. In fact, based on records kept by the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery, the entire state of Florida, arguably the mecca of extreme underwater diving sites, has roughly the same yearly death toll as the Blue Hole on its own. Imagine one small stretch of highway out in the middle of nowhere causing as many accidents as every Formula One racetrack combined. Or imagine one small town restaurant where more people get sick than every restaurant in a nearby city combined. Clearly, something out of the ordinary has to be going on. There is something freakish beneath the surface of the Blue Hole of Denab, and it's killing divers of all skill levels at a rate that is beyond abnormal. So, what is it? The people of Dahab have a local legend to explain the sensational killing capacity of the site. The legend states that long ago, there was a young woman who lived on the coast of Dahab named Shaheen. Shaheen had fallen in love with a local boy, but their love was forbidden by their parents. Against her will, Shaheen was engaged to be married to another man, a man who she didn't love. Way back then, the opening to the blue hole was not yet submerged by the sea. In despair, the young Shaheen threw herself over the edge, falling to her death. According to local legend, the blue hole is now haunted by Shaheen's restless spirit. With the enticing glow of the archway hundreds of feet below, the broken-hearted Shaheen lures young men to her, hypnotizing them before taking their souls into the next world. It's a stirring fable, and perhaps one that has more than a hint of truth behind it. But surely there has to be more to it than that. Well, as we're about to see, the history of deaths at this site is nothing short of unbelievable. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at some of the people who have met their doom in the blue hole. Perhaps their stories can help shed some light on the true nature of this mind-bending phenomena. In November of 1997, 2 experienced divers from Ireland were in Dahab diving with the Paddy Diving School. They were 22-year-old Martin Guerra and 23-year-old Conor O'Regan. According to a report by the Irish Times, O'Regan had previous experience not only diving, but specifically with diving in the Red Sea. His fellow diver Guerra was a diving instructor who had been living in Egypt for the past year. On Wednesday, November 19, 1997, local diver Tarek Omar got the call he had been fearing he would get ever since he started working as an instructor in the area 2 years prior. Martin Guerra and Conor O'Regan had entered the blue hole together and had failed to resurface. Steeling his resolve, Omar dove into the blue hole to look for the missing pair. What he ended up finding would leave a permanent mark on his memory. The 2 Irishmen were resting in a ditch about 335 feet below the surface. Both had drowned, and yet their bodies remained locked in a haunting embrace, almost 2 corpses dancing. Omar later speculated that one had been sinking and the other had been trying to pull them back up when the pair both eventually drowned. But which of the pair had first begun sinking, and why? Their names are among the many that line the rock wall near the entrance, ensuring that even today, their tragic deaths will at the very least be remembered. But understood or explained? Not so much. Nearly a decade earlier, before Tarek Omar had moved to Dahab and earned himself the nickname Bone Collector, another pair of divers had met a similar fate. Daniel Malak and Tarek El-Khadi both drowned in the blue hole on the same day in 1988. Tarek Omar had very little time to dwell on the past, however. Within a couple of years of his first grisly recovery mission, he found himself at the forefront of what would become the blue hole's most famous death. In April of the year 2000, 22-year-old Russian-Israeli diving instructor Yuri Lipsky had been itching to dive the blue hole for at least a year prior. On that fateful day, witnesses say they saw Lipsky entering the water off the coast of Dahab with 2 very important things missing: a diving buddy and an extra oxygen tank. Lipsky's motivations for diving alone and with only 1 oxygen tank remain controversial to this day. But amazingly, one thing we do know he had with him that day was a video camera. The last anybody saw him alive, Lipsky was walking up the coast in his diving gear. When he failed to resurface, word spread quickly. Within a day, Lipsky's father had traveled from Russia to Dahab to look for his son. The man was reportedly all but ready to dive into the hole himself and had to be talked out of it by locals. Once again, the task of searching the blue hole fell to Tarek Omar. The search for Yuri Lipsky was unusual, in that Lipsky had been diving alone, and no one knew how far into the hole he had actually made it. The only way to find out was to conduct a thorough search. Lipsky's body was eventually found at 115 meters below the surface, nearly 3 times the depth considered safe for recreational divers. But Lipsky was no amateur. The 22-year-old was in fact a diving instructor. So why, millions soon wondered, did the video captured by his camera show him descending at a rapid rate towards his own demise? The roughly 7-minute video went on to make Lipsky's death one of the most famous in diving history. It was as disturbing as it was mysterious. Tarek Omar would later offer the theory that Lipsky was weighed down and that his camera may have tipped the scales. However, this explanation alone hasn't been enough to stop the internet from proliferating various theories about the nature of this strange and horrifying accident. Overlooked amid much of the hysteria is the fact that Lipsky's death is part of a larger phenomena, and the phenomena did not stop with Lipsky. A few years after Yuri Lipsky's death received international attention, a 24-year-old diver from England named James Smith went missing at the Blue Hole. The story initially followed what seemed to be emerging as a pattern. He entered the water, and somewhere between there and the opening 250 meters away, he simply vanished. However, one thing that makes Smith's death particularly haunting is that despite the fact he was known to die in a very specific location, namely the Blue Hole, his body has never been found. The rest of us can only assume he's still buried somewhere deep beneath the surface of the Red Sea, swallowed forever by the alluring spirit of Shaheen. Visitors to the Blue Hole today will see James Smith's name alongside many others. But there's another name that might make you do a double take. Karl Marx. It's not the author of the Communist Manifesto. It is, in fact, a 45-year-old German diver who had a fatal accident on January 10, 2007 at the Blue Hole of Dahab. A year after Marx, Swiss diver Stefan Felder suffered a similar fate, descending confidently and peacefully into the calm coastal waters of the Red Sea. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, he was nowhere to be found. In recent years, the deaths have not shown any signs of stopping either. In fact, in 2017, international interest was reignited in the remote diving site after a dramatic incident involving multiple pro divers. World record-setting freediver Alicia Zecchini traveled to the Blue Hole in July of 2017. Not only was Zecchini planning to dive at the deadly site, but she would in fact be attempting something that perhaps no person had ever attempted before. She would be trying to cross the Blue Hole's famous archway with just a single breath. Accompanying Zecchini was Irish safety diver Stephen Keenan. Keenan was described by Outsider magazine as, quote, "freediving's most accomplished and beloved safety diver." Surely, if anyone could pass through the deadly Blue Hole and live to tell the tale, it would be the sport's most accomplished and beloved safety diver, right? At about 160 feet below the surface, Alicia Zecchini became disoriented. Automatically, Keenan dove down to meet her. As he swam towards the surface carrying Zecchini, Zecchini was eventually able to regain her bearings and swim to safety. But when she got there, Keenan was nowhere to be found. It was later determined that Keenan had blacked out. It is unknown to this day the depth at which Keenan lost consciousness. He was found floating on the surface nearby, face down, motionless. Keenan's death sent shockwaves through the international diving community, providing even more evidence that the forces at work in Dahab were truly something above and beyond the ordinary in an already extraordinary sport. Alright, we've now looked at just 9 of the potentially 200-plus fatal accidents that have occurred at the Blue Hole. Frankly, most of what we learn from these stories is that whatever forces are at work, they're swift and they're powerful. Divers seem to just disappear in the blink of an eye. Seasoned professionals seem to suddenly lose their grasp of the situation, descending inexplicably, almost as if they're doing it on purpose. As bizarre as the whole thing is, thanks to an international community of diving experts and a growing interest in the site over previous decades, some plausible explanations do exist. We'll go through these one by one, starting with the phenomena known as narcosis. In underwater diving, one of the most important factors for divers to always consider is the inherent risk of breathing out of a gas tank at extreme depth. According to the NIH, quote, "Certain gases at high pressure cause an anesthetic effect that alters a diver's consciousness." This strange condition has also been nicknamed the raptures of the deep. It has even been called the martini effect for the drunken state it seems to put unsuspecting divers in. The mechanics of it are still not completely understood by science, but in short, certain gases with higher lipophilicity cause mental impairment as underwater depth increases. These effects can be felt starting at depths below around 30 feet, and they're usually mild. But once you start descending to extreme depths of several hundred feet or more, the symptoms are downright shocking. Divers breathing at a depth of below 300 feet can experience powerful hallucinations. They can also lose their sense of both time and direction while experiencing dramatic changes in mood, including becoming manic or euphoric. In extreme cases, narcosis itself can even kill you. Divers in the blue hole are potentially encountering depths of 400 feet below the surface, meaning they are way beyond even the far threshold for severe narcosis. The connection here between the science and the mythology is hard to ignore. Upon reaching the glowing blue archway, divers may suddenly be overcome by an eerie change in both body and mind. This change is, by all accounts, something like being really drunk, really confused, and suddenly enthusiastic and impulsive. Could this be the sinister lore of the ancient spirit of Shaheen? As chilling as it is to consider, it is quite possible that many of the divers who met their demise here met it by the propulsion of their own flippers. Just ask Sylvie Martin. An experienced diver in her own right, Martin was diving the blue hole when, according to her own first-hand account, she began feeling off. At about 200 feet below the surface, she actually began intentionally deflating her buoyancy regulator. Her dive buddy had to swim down, grab her, and pull her up toward the surface before she suddenly came to her senses again. If narcosis can induce borderline suicidal behavior in experienced divers, what can it do to inexperienced divers? The simple reality of the blue hole is that it is really, really deep. Much deeper than many diving enthusiasts will ever go in their lifetime. Depth does incredibly dangerous things to your mind. But that's not all that depth does. Another deadly obstacle imposed by the blue hole's extreme depth is the sheer challenge of breathing itself. Not only do you run the risk of crazy hallucinations and deranged behavior thanks to narcosis, but you also run the risk of simply running out of air. The reason for this is simple, but easy to overlook or underestimate. The further you descend underwater, and the more water pressure increases, the more oxygen you need. This need increases at an alarmingly fast rate. Atmospheric pressure doubles every 10 meters. So, roughly speaking, every 10 meters you descend, your body requires double the amount of oxygen. When you are hundreds of feet below the surface, the amount of air you need to breathe is many, many times more than what you would normally need on land. Bringing enough air to make it all the way through the depths of the blue hole is a genuine logistical challenge. Even if you bring all the necessary equipment with you, which will surely include several tanks with different gas mixes which you can easily cycle through, you can't hang out down there for long. On the other hand, if you don't bring enough air in the first place, you're obviously in big trouble from the moment you start the dive. To be so catastrophically underprepared would seem like a rookie mistake. But there is ample reason to think that even experienced divers can seriously miscalculate at this particular site. For example, Yuri Lipsky, a diving instructor, reportedly entered the blue hole with only one tank strapped to his back. Even those who are familiar with the fact you need more oxygen for lower depths can still underestimate just how much they need for depths as extreme as this. So in short, we can add unexpectedly running out of air to the list of possible explanations, in addition to losing your mental faculties due to narcosis. But there's still more going on here. It's hard enough already to navigate an underwater dive site with a narcosis-drunken brain and no air in your lungs. But try doing it while also being so deep underwater that you can't even figure out which direction is the surface and which direction is the bottom of the ocean. This sounds almost impossible because it's so far removed from our intuitions about the physical world, but in such a foreign, extreme environment, basic senses we normally rely on start to break down. According to the National Ocean Service, it is rare that sunlight ever reaches further than 200 meters below the surface of the ocean. Divers in the blue hole are potentially swimming well over halfway toward the point where their surroundings would become as black as empty outer space, where photosynthesis is impossible, and where, soon enough, David Attenborough would start pointing out shrimp that glow in the dark and fish with light bulbs dangling in front of their faces. Divers in the blue hole never quite reach this point of total blackness, but keep in mind, they are also wearing masks and heavy diving equipment, and they are swimming through dramatic underwater landscapes that block out what little light there is even further. The ominously intriguing blue glow of the archway is made so, in large part, by the fact that it dominates the spectrum of visible light at that depth. Now, divers will inevitably carry flashlights, but while these are lifesavers when it comes to one's immediate surroundings, they don't provide much help when it comes to the larger picture. Floating through deep, open waters with little to no ability to see the surface means you might decide it's time to bail, and yet realize with shock that you don't know which way to go. This, too, might explain why so many divers who enter the blue hole fail to resurface. There is one last factor worth considering when it comes to the blue hole, or rather, the Red Sea in general. The Red Sea is a unique body of water for two reasons. One, it is home to an unusually vast array of marine life, both fish and plant, many of which can only be found there and nowhere else. And two, it is largely unexplored. Couple this with the fact that many of the blue hole's victims, including even some of the ones we looked at today, have never been found, and it does paint an interesting picture. Of course, let's be clear, this is highly speculative, but it does seem possible, given the amount of unique marine life and how little we still know about what lies beneath the Red Sea, that chance encounters with hostile organisms could perhaps explain some of these disappearances too. After all, where else are unsuspecting divers plunging freely into extreme depths of this particular body of water on a regular basis? The Red Sea has plenty of other popular diving sites, but none so extreme, so deep, so full of shadows. There is something distinctly human about underwater diving. It represents one of our most innate traits in its purest form, the primal impulse to venture into the unknown. It is hard to imagine a world more alien than the world awaiting those who swim the blue hole of Dahab, and yet it sits freely accessible just meters away from the bars and beach towels that line the South Egyptian shore. But this alien world also inflicts strange, rapid infirmities upon our land-dwelling human bodies. It sucks the air from our lungs, even when we thought we brought enough air with us. It confounds our special awareness, temporarily erasing physical realities as fundamental as the sky above and the ground below. Perhaps most frightening of all, it corrupts our minds, making us think and do things that only moments ago we would have never imagined. Contrary to what many might believe, however, safely diving the blue hole of Dahab is, in fact, possible. Highly experienced, technically proficient divers can and do take all the necessary precautions and swim through this marvelous natural wonder on a regular basis. But sadly, even to this day, they constitute a mere percentage of the total number of divers who make the voyage out to this mystical and remote site. Until the international diving community wakes up to the truly incredible risks associated with the Blue Hole and begins heeding the warnings and advice of local experts like Tarek Omar, the Blue Hole of Dahab will continue to cast its alluring spell over unsuspecting divers, reeling them in with its magical glow, then snatching them out of existence before anyone has time to save them. The name Mill Pond Cave doesn't sound particularly exciting, but this little-known cave in Jackson County, Tennessee is full of secrets. The first is that it isn't actually a pond, even though it looks like one. It's actually a spring. The cave system, hidden just behind this unassuming little spring, wanders back for over 400 feet. It's also quite narrow and windy, making it both technically challenging and pretty terrifying. But what makes this cave really stand out is the unbelievable saga that took place in here in 2019, involving an absolute nightmare scenario and a rescue worker who had just been involved in a world-famous caving incident in Thailand a year earlier. Before we get into our story, we should clear up something that might be a bit confusing. Jackson County, Tennessee is the location of Mill Pond Cave. But Jackson County, Tennessee is not the same county where numerous other caves, some of which we covered, are located. That county is Jackson County, Alabama, about 150 miles south. Making matters even more confusing is the fact that these two counties are close enough to each other that, in the case of emergencies, the same rescue crews are often called upon. For example, as you'll see in our story today, the Chattanooga-Hamilton County Rescue Service was called to Mill Pond Cave in northern Tennessee. However, Chattanooga is in southern Tennessee, and it's actually closer to Jackson County, Alabama than Jackson County, Tennessee. So when you hear me say in this video that Chattanooga rescue teams were sent out to Jackson County, keep in mind that in this case it is a different Jackson County, one that is more than 2 hours away by car. Jackson County, Alabama, the county we're not covering today, is like Disneyland for cave enthusiasts. But Jackson County, Tennessee is much less known for being a caving destination. The state of Tennessee as a whole does have some pretty interesting caves. Probably the most well-known are Cumberland Caverns, which are a national landmark drawing visitors from all around the world. They even host concerts here in one of the larger chambers. If you heard of someone going to Tennessee to explore caves, you'd probably assume that they were going somewhere like Warren County to visit Cumberland Caverns. Finding out they were going to Jackson County instead might be a little surprising. The truth is, most people who look at Mill Pond Cave don't realize what they're looking at. It doesn't look like much more than a shallow, muddy little body of water. If you happen to notice what looked like a small cave at the back of it, you'd probably assume it didn't lead anywhere beyond a few feet. Mill Pond Cave is sort of like a hidden gem. Back in 2019, it wasn't well known outside of the professional caving community, and it only drew the most experienced and adventurous cave explorers. And that's exactly who was drawn to it in April of 2019. Josh Brachley is a decorated caver from the UK. Originally hailing from Cornwall, Brachley has spent many years on various expeditions and adventures all around the world. Brachley became obsessed with caves and cave exploration during his tenure at Plymouth University, where he studied meteorology. Plymouth University has a caving club. Josh joined the club as a student, and it instilled in him a passion for caves that never really wore off. In the years of wild adventures he has had since his time at Plymouth University, Brachley has encountered countless high-stress scenarios. These experiences have given Brachley a unique insight into important topics like teamwork and stress management, and he actually gives talks at conferences and other business events. Brachley has ventured through jungles, glaciers, and everything in between. But the experience that got him international acclaim was in 2018 in Thailand. As many of you watching will probably be familiar with, Thailand in 2018 was home to one of the most terrifying caving disasters in recent history. After a soccer practice, 12 youth soccer players between the ages of 11 to 16, along with their 25-year-old assistant coach, went inside Tham Luang Nang Non in northern Thailand. The name translates to Great Cave of the Sleeping Lady. It is a massive karstic cave located in the Doi Nang Non mountain range. The cave goes several miles underground. Shortly after this soccer team entered the cave, a downpour of rain caused the cave to flood behind them. This blocked them from getting out. Amazingly, they were able to travel even farther into the cave and find an area where they were all, at least temporarily, safe. But it would take another 9 days before they were found, and another 9 days after that before they were all successfully rescued. The rescue effort was a media sensation and involved not only the Thai government, but an international group of cave diving experts. Josh Brachley was one of those experts. What is probably the most astonishing part of the entire Thai cave story is that Josh Brachley and the rest of the diving team were successfully able to save the lives of all 13 people, the assistant coach and every one of the young teenagers who were there with them. After 18 days of isolated terror, Brachley and others reintroduced them all once again to sunlight, food, and safety, surely saving their lives. Tragically, there were 2 casualties in the rescue mission. Both were part of the rescue team, and both were former Thai Navy SEALs. Saman Kunan died on July 6th during the operation. Many months later, Berut Pakpara also died due to a blood infection he had contracted during the operation. Brachley survived the rescue mission and went on to receive numerous awards and accolades from both the Thai government and his home country. In fact, Brachley was actually knighted by the Kingdom of Thailand and was made a member of the Order of the British Empire, more commonly recognized by the initials MBE at the end of his name. It is extremely rare for cave rescues to be successful. For 13 people to be trapped in a cave due to monsoon flooding, and for 13 people to emerge still alive after almost 3 weeks, well, that's practically unheard of. Cave rescue workers know these odds better than anybody, and they know that when something goes wrong deep inside a cave and someone gets stranded, it is sadly very rare that they'll ever make it out alive. Josh Brachley would have been as aware as anybody of how dangerous caving is and how little chance of survival he would have if something went wrong. That's what makes what happened to him in Jackson County, Tennessee so shocking. In April of 2019, Josh Brachley and 4 other fellow cave divers traveled to Jackson County, Tennessee. They were there to explore a little-known gem for serious cavers, the cave at Mill Pond. Part of the reason Mill Pond Cave was so unknown was because, for generations, it was located on private property. No one who knew anything about cave exploration had any clue about the site until it was discovered in 2016 by a man named Chuck Sutherland. Sutherland is a naturalist from Tennessee. He says that in November of 2016, a friend of his offered to show him what she may have thought was a pond in her backyard. The reason I say she may have thought it was a pond was because her husband's family had owned the property for generations, and somewhere along the line they had named the spot Mill Pond. Mill, because at one time the water had been used to drive a mill, and pond because, well, presumably they thought it was a pond. Just in case you're wondering, the difference between a spring and a pond is that spring water comes from deep underground. A pond is just a small body of water. For cavers, this distinction is important, but for the family that owned the property in Tennessee, it wasn't so important. At least, not until Chuck Sutherland showed up. Sutherland took one look at the small cave opening at the back of the alleged pond, and he immediately recognized what he described as, quote, a cave entrance within the structure of the meteor impact at Flynn Creek, making this especially interesting, unquote. He's referring there to a huge impact crater that was created 360 million years ago and is also in Jackson County, Tennessee. Sutherland wasted no time. He persuaded his friend and her family to allow a diver to explore the cave. He also submitted Mill Pond to the Tennessee Cave Survey and brought someone from the organization out to the site, a man named Gerald Money. Money seemed to agree that the cave looked interesting and warranted further exploration, but he corrected Sutherland's submission. The Tennessee Cave Survey is, quote, not a pond survey, he said, so the officially registered name became Mill Pond Cave. An odd name, but once you know the backstory, it makes a little more sense. Within a week, a professional diver ventured inside of the cave. He reported that the dimensions of the inside were large, but that the water was particularly silty. That means sediment coating the underwater surfaces that can easily get knocked up and make it very hard to see for long periods of time. He expressed some concerns about venturing too far into the cave, despite making a few attempts. About a year later, another experienced diver named Jason Richards managed to make it much deeper into the cave and plot out much of its structure. Richards swam 434 feet before he finally reached an air pocket, meaning an area where he could emerge partially from the water, and turned around. Everyone was surely surprised and impressed at how deep the cave turned out to be. Just a few years ago, those who knew about the area thought it was a pond. Now, they knew of a cave stretching hundreds of feet under the surface of rural Tennessee. What's more, based on this information, it seems like we still don't know how far back it actually goes. Jason Richards documented 434 feet of it, but it sounds like he turned around before reaching the end. Perhaps this is part of what drew Josh Brachley and his diving friends to Mill Pond Cave. On the afternoon of Tuesday, April 16, 2019, Brachley and 4 other divers entered Mill Pond Cave wearing diving gear. Although Brachley had been involved in very high-level professional operations throughout his caving career, this, by all appearances, was a recreational dive. The group would be relying very heavily on the use of guide ropes, since Mill Pond Cave is particularly narrow, particularly long, and particularly silty and difficult to see in. Brachley is literally a knighted cave diver, so what happened after they entered the cave shows that things can go wrong no matter who you are. At some point, deep in the bowels of Mill Pond Cave, far away from the surface, far away from the light of day, Brachley's guide rope broke. In no time, he found himself separated from his fellow divers. Knowing how serious the situation was, Brachley acted fast. He knew there was a limited amount of time before his air ran out and he drowned. He swam deeper into the cave until he reached an air pocket, very likely the same air pocket where Jason Richards turned around, and where the current map of Mill Pond Cave ends. This would have put Josh Brachley 434 feet inside the cave, with no food, no drinkable water, no way to contact the outside world, and very soon, no air tank to allow him to swim back the way he came. Brachley's friends returned to the surface to find that their worst fears had been confirmed. Brachley was not there, meaning he was still in the cave and missing. They reportedly spent several hours looking for him themselves before finally deciding to call 911. Rescue teams from far and wide came from multiple states. Remember I said that Chattanooga-Hamilton County Rescue Service was called and that they're located roughly 2 hours away from Mill Pond Cave? It took until 1 a.m. for rescue crews to even arrive at the scene. Things were already looking seriously grim before the rescue operation was even fully underway. Ed Sorensen is a diver from Marianna, Florida, who's famous for making numerous rescues, mainly in his home state of Florida. He was the one who swam down into Mill Pond Cave to try and find Josh Brachley. One rescuer saving another. Sorensen later told reporters that the water was cold and the cave was dark and narrow. He described the cave as having, quote, zero visibility, meaning that breaking or losing the guide rope was like a death sentence. He said, quote, you could be inches or 100 yards from the line. It doesn't matter because you can't see. Despite these challenging conditions, Sorensen was able to find the broken line and determine the spot where Brachley had gotten separated from his fellow divers. Sorensen was very meticulous and methodical in his approach. He says he searched, quote, every nook and cranny for a body. If Sorensen, a highly experienced rescue diver, was expecting to find Brachley's dead body, it would be understandable based on the probability. Of course, Sorensen would have been doing everything he possibly could to try and save Brachley's life, but in more than 20 years of rescue diving, Sorensen had only been able to save 5 people, and Sorensen is one of the best rescue divers in the world. Brachley had been missing for well over 24 hours. His guideline had broken, and his friends had not seen or heard from him since being deep inside the cave. The odds against survival here were incalculably high, but on Wednesday night, more than a full day after Brachley disappeared, something extremely rare and wonderful happened. Something that distinguishes this story even further from so many other stories you hear about caving. As Ed Sorensen made his way deeper into Mill Pond Cave, He eventually made it to the air pocket, the same air pocket that Jason Richards made it to when plotting the cave, and the same air pocket Josh Brachley swam to after losing his line in the water. To Sorensen's absolute shock, he found Josh Brachley covered in mud and still alive. Not only that, but Brachley appeared somehow to be in good spirits. He thanked Sorensen profusely for coming to his rescue. He explained that he had made several attempts to rescue himself, but had concerns about his depleting oxygen supply. Brachley had thus made the brave decision to stay inside the cave, floating around in cold water and pitch-black darkness where there was air to breathe and where he could wait for someone to come and rescue him. Brachley had had no contact with his friends or anybody else since getting separated, nor had he even seen daylight. The decision to avoid trying to swim back and thereby avoid the risk of drowning, and to remain in darkness, trusting that sooner or later help would be on the way, is remarkable. Brachley's faith paid off. Sorensen, euphoric to find Brachley alive, assisted Brachley on the long and treacherous journey all the way back out of the cave. The sound of uproarious applause, they re-emerged from that little, unassuming opening at the back of Mill Pond at around 7 p.m. on Wednesday, April 17th. Brachley had remained alone in the cave for more than 27 hours. When Brachley was asked by the rescue crew above ground whether he needed anything from them, he reportedly just smiled and said, "Pizza." I think it's safe to say that in deeming Josh Brachley worthy of knighthood, the Kingdom of Thailand was not mistaken. This caving story is so poetic and so perfectly constructed that it's almost too good for Hollywood. A valiant young man first embarks on the rescue of helpless children in a cave in Thailand, which, against all odds, succeeds. Then, decorated in medals and honor, he himself becomes the unexpected victim of a caving accident. His bravery never falters. He makes a difficult decision, he waits to be rescued, and then against all odds, again, he is successfully rescued. It's a caving disaster story with a rare happy ending. But that's just the thing, rare. Even though Brachley was miraculously able to survive, he is the exception. Brachley is one of the most elite cave divers in the world. He also still had a serious accident with the breaking of his guideline, which could easily have been fatal for him, and would 9 times out of 10 be fatal for any diver. It is therefore both an incredibly moving story and a cautionary tale. Brachley is a living embodiment of the human spirit, the thing that drives us to explore, to be brave, to dare to dive inside dark and dangerous caves in the first place. But his story is also a testament to how dangerous those caves can be. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more caving stories in the near future. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.